Okay, I will call the Education Committee meeting to order. May we have roll call, please?
Michael O'Brien,
Present.
Rich Reagan,
Here.
Randy Brockway,
Here.
Rachel Morella,
Here.
Juliette Boyd,
Yeah.
Arthur Perry,
Present.
Mary Rose Mangia.
Here.
And next on the agenda would be public comment. I have one signer-upper, Mr. Bill House.
Hello, my name is Bill Howes. I'm the president of the Riverside Education Council. First, we would like to welcome the new board members. We look forward to working with you as well as we have with the rest of the board. Next, I would like to take some time to inform the board about the teacher perspective on Common Core implementation for this school year. Teachers are going above and beyond to make the implementation of Common Core happen in the best possible way for our students. We've been very busy working on creating lessons and coming to know the new standards and expectations. This work has been done through Monday professional development time, but more so through dedicating lunch times, school time, and weekends to this implementation and planning. Considering the expedited timeline of this implementation, our staff, we feel, should be commended for their tremendous efforts. It's because of these efforts that we will see again the renaissance of learning in District 96. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right. So next on the agenda is a presentation from the administration on district ISAT and 5 essential survey results and a few other topics. So I would just ask for keeping things rolling, that we go through the presentation and then we can have discussion at the end, if that's okay with everyone. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Art. As Mr. Perry said, we have two parts of our presentation tonight. One is going to focus specifically on the ISAT results and the 5 essential skills. I will be presenting the 5 essential survey results, and Dr. Gannon will be presenting the ISAT results from the spring of 2013. Spring of 2014, I apologize. And then we're going to, inside this presentation, we're also going to have some discussion items. And I couldn't agree more with the comments that were made tonight, as well as the comments that have been made the past several months when we've been talking about increased professional development, increased rigor, increased relevance for our students to make our schools the best they can be, and raise our rankings not only statewide, but nationally and globally, and that's what the Common Core standards, as well as all the technology, as well as response to intervention, as well as getting our special education compliance to law, having some positive behavior intervention, and then providing all that support for our teachers. It's really to give our kids rigorous and relevant learning experiences and keeping us on the pathway to excellence. These 5 topics: professional development is going to be given by Mr. Juraka and Ms. Foreman. They're going to be sharing what the middle school perspective is and the elementary school perspective. Common Core state standards, as we all know, is a district-wide initiative, but it starts at the building and it ends in our classroom. So we have Dr. Gannon and Mr. Preble, but we were going to have some teachers present, but we said for the sake of time, we're going to ask them to come back at a different time. Response to intervention, we have Mr. Juraka, Mr. Gehrman, and Mr. Gatz presenting at what's happening at the middle school level as well as the elementary level, and we're talking about behavior as well as academics. Then we have our instructional technology goals from Mr. Tefano, and then our special education and student service goals from Mrs. Shaw. Again, each of these 5 topics should be a meeting in itself. We realize we're going to be covering a lot. There are also standalone initiatives and programs that we should be doing, dedicating a year to, but we're doing them all at once, again, to provide that rigor, relevance, and keep us on the path going forward. So for our 5 essential overview, at our last meeting in September, the board adopted the goals and priorities, and you all have a hard copy in front of you. And we're sharing how each of the topics that we're talking about today relates to objectives Goal 1, Objective 1, 2, and 3, as well as Goal 3, Objective 2. So we're showing how it ties into our goals and priorities of the school year. So the 5 essentials overview. What is it? It's a survey to measure our school strengths and weaknesses and providing a clear pathway to improvement. Why do we do this? Well, it's done statewide, and it's a comprehensive and reliable information on how we can improve our schools that test scores alone do not measure. It's given to students, staff, and parents. Students just in 6th through 8th grade, and then in a high school district, it's given 9 through 12. And it's given in February or March of each school year. The results will be reported out to the public and to the community in the report card, and those come out in late October. So what are the 5 essential components? Researchers determined that from the University of Chicago that there's 5 components, and we've talked about some of them in our previous presentation about the 9 components of high achieving schools. But the first one is effective leaders, and that's where our principals and our instructional leaders work to implement a clear strategy and vision for our school success. And as we talked about last month, our principals are doing and following the same things with their staff, as well as our directors are following and doing the same things with their teams of our goals and priorities. Collaborative teachers. Staff, which I can speak to, is committed to the school's success. We heard from Mr. House today. They receive strong professional development, and they work together to improve the school. Involve families. As we saw last week at our parent university, we had over 80 families attend to learn about Common Core and how the curriculum and the expectations and the assessments are changing. So how does the community work together and our families work together to support our learning that's going on in our schools? Supportive environment. This is only assessed by our students. Do they feel safe at school? Do they feel that it's organized? Do they feel respected? Do they feel that they have high expectations and that they're supported by their teachers? And then ambitious instructions. Do they, again, a student response, do they feel that their classes are challenging? Do they feel that they're rigorous? Do they feel like they're being asked to apply their knowledge and being challenged? The results are measured in 5 different ways of those categories. There's a least implementation, a less implementation, average, more, and most. So what I'm going to share with you on each slide is how we did in each of those 5 categories, as well as how the state did on average in each of those 5 categories. The first one is effective leaders. As we talked about, our school and district leaders, do they provide that shared vision? You can see how each of our schools did. On average, we scored 45, and in Illinois, the average was about 51. So we're slightly lower than where we need to be for effective leadership in our schools. Collaborative teachers. How well are our teachers working together? Do they feel supported? Do they feel like they're getting that effective classroom, professional development? Our average was 42, combining the schools, and in Illinois, the average is 51. So we have some work to do there too. Involved families. This is something to be proud of. In all of our schools, we received more implementation. We're at 67%, and in the state, we are at 52. Supportive environment. This is something really to be proud of because this is where our students responded. They feel supported. They feel that their teachers care about them. They feel like they're in a safe environment. They feel like they're respected and valued. And again, more implementation. So our 6th through 8th graders responded with 71%, and on average in Illinois, our score is 46. And lastly, again, another student-driven response is the ambitious instruction. Do they feel challenged? Do they feel like they're learning? Do they feel like they're able to express their knowledge? Our average came out to 62%, which is in the more implementation category, and overall in Illinois, it was 48%. So our overall performance is how we did as a district based on the strength of each category. So they take each of those categories and they say, how ready and prepared are you for school improvement? It's categorized in either partially, moderately organized, or very well organized. And overall performance, as you can see, it's divided by school and then as a district. We are at the lower end of well organized. So they took the average of all of our schools, which we ranked in each of those categories. But in Illinois, the average is moderately. So we are on the path to school improvement. We have all the great components in place. Obviously, there are some areas to improve and do better. And from that, the summary of the results are, on average, we've got the following scores. So for ambitious instruction, again, from our kids, more implementation. We're in the more implementation stage. Classes are challenging, they're engaging. Our effective leaders, they got average implementation. Collaborative teachers, average implementation. So again, teachers collaborate to promote professional growth. This is an area that was measured last spring, and this was before our professional development started this fall. So we're hoping to see some improvement in that area as well. And again, for effective leadership, we are all implementing the same goals that you see in front of you, the goals and priority, the entire district. So it starts at the district level, goes to the directors with their teams, and then goes to the principals with their teams. So we're hoping to see an increase in that score as well. Involved families, great score, we got more implementation, that the staff builds strong external relationships, and again, this is answered by our families. And then a supportive environment, again, answered by our students, that they feel safe and supportive, and that their teachers have high expectation for them. So we got a great score there of more implementation. So we want to keep those areas of more implementation continuing to go forward. And then we're going to share with you some next steps that we're going to put into place of how we can improve the area of average, because we don't want to be average. We want to excel, and we want to continue to do better. Effective leadership. Principals and teachers implement a shared vision for success. So one of the things that we're doing this year at our monthly leadership and learning meetings, we meet weekly as a district leadership team with principals and directors. And one of those meetings of the month is devoted to a topic that we learn and lead about. Last month it was professional learning communities. This month coming up, it will be some legal topics. So we're going to have our attorney come in and present to us on how we stay current with the legal changes and reforms. But then one of the things that's key that what we're having principals do is we want our staff and our communities to see our principals as the instructional leaders and the ones providing the professional developments. So they're leading day professional development meetings in their buildings. And then on the fourth Monday, when we meet as entire grade levels, each principal is responsible for a grade level. So they're leading that professional development. They're also this year going to be starting to be evaluated by student growth. So they're picking a certain group of building and they're saying, we want to see our students grow in this area by this much. So they'll be evaluated by that, and they're going to be working with their staff to make sure that interventions and supports are put into place. Secondly, collaborative teachers. We received an average implementation from our staff. Teachers collaborate to promote professional growth. Again, staff are participating in weekly targeted professional development. We think that'll help increase our score. They're collaborating more, they're getting ideas, they're willing to share. They're talking about what they're doing in the classrooms. It's not being done in isolation. And they also are participating more in grade level and team meetings. And for our schools that are one section buildings such as Hollywood and Blythe, we're looking to set that up virtually. So a first grade teacher can talk to a first grade teacher because they can't go across the hall like they can at Ames and Central, and then Hauser with their grade level or subject matter colleagues. So those are some things that we're putting in place for this year, and we're hoping to see some growth in our effective leadership and our collaborative teachers and our, and again, 5 Essentials is one measure of how we're evaluating our success, but it's reported out at a state level and through our community, so we want to see those scores continue to go up. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Gannon, who is going to review our last school year's ISAT results.
All right. Hello. First and foremost, I feel one of our goals this year is to get back up into the top 50 districts, and I do take that to heart. And I think we're going to see some of our ISAT results today, where I don't have a comparison measure with that I was able to have last year. Last year I came with an average of where districts may have dropped with the raise cut scores. I couldn't find that yet this year, but you'll see that in some areas, last year's test was the first year that the test was fully aligned with Common Core. It's not the PARCC test, so it's still the ISAT test, so it's still a one kind of snapshot in time because this test, exactly like it was last year, will not exist again as far as we know. The year before, it was partially aligned. So you would almost expect some dips in scores, more or less because we're in the process of aligning our curriculum, and now we have an assessment that's fully aligned to Common Core. But I do think, as a whole, especially in some buildings, we did real well, but we definitely have areas to focus on. This is the district's reading scores in 2013, 2014. You'll see at a district, we're at 76.4% meeting and exceeding. Again, this is a fully aligned Common Core test, not at 90. Our goal isn't 2 years to get to 90. It'll be on the park test, different test. Doesn't change our goal. Hauser was at 74.5, Ames at 74.6, Light Park at 74.7, Central 80.4, and Hollywood at 79.4. Last year's ISAT reading test. And I am going to, even though my name wasn't on the slides presented, jump in and steal a couple RTI slides because I think it's important to connect this with where we are with our RTI process. So the next slide, I'm a comparisons guy. I like to see how things compare from year to year. It's very difficult to do this because the tests were different, but I did it anyways, just to give us kind of an idea. So you'll see here, the 2012, 2013, again, that's the partially aligned Common Core. ISAT in 2013-14 is fully aligned. You compare from year to year. As a district, we dropped almost 2 percentage points. Again, I wish I could tell you how that compared. At Hauser, we went from 77.3 to 74.6. At Ames, we went from 86.4 to 74.5. At Blythe Park, we went from 79.6 to 74.7. At Central, we went from 82.8 to 80.4. And at Hollywood, we went 78.4 to 79.4. So in Hollywood, you'll see in both areas in Hollywood, we actually grew on both tests. Even though the test was, it was said to be more rigorous. One of our goals this year too is to, we really need to pay particular focus to all of our groups of students. And one of our goals is we want a 10% increase in subgroups. So you can see our subgroups from the 2 past assessments. In 2012, 2013, you needed 45 students in order for ISDE state to qualify group as a subgroup. So in 2012, 2013, we didn't have a Black or African American subgroup. But we, in 2013, 2014, we do. So the goal now is to move growing, all these groups forward. And you can see from the second category, Hispanic or Latino subgroup, we went from 70 to 65.8. In our white subgroup, we went from 84.6 to 81.5. IEP 55 to 41.5. And free and reduced lunch, 46.4 to 51.2. So again, there is a lot of work to be done. We're doing some great work. Teachers are doing great work, but there is a lot of work to be done. And I think sometimes you need to really kind of deconstruct things to see where that work needs to be done and what that looks like. Math. I want to take a moment, actually, before I do the math, to settle with Hollywood. On the Common Core aligned test in math, Hollywood performed at 90.5%. We want it higher, I mean, we always do, right? But that's great. Hollywood did some interesting things with RTI math last year, as is one of our other schools that we're going to bring on board to all schools this year. But that's something definitely to celebrate. In math as a district, last year, 78.2. Hauser was 72.8, Ames 81.5, Blythe Park 81.3, Central 83.6, and then Hollywood, hit that 90 threshold. To compare last year again, not equal tests. The comparisons, you see 77.8 to 78.1, so we went up as a district, even though the tests got more rigorous. Hauser, we dropped a little bit. Ames 89 to 81, Blythe Park increased significantly. Central increased and Hollywood increased. So there are some things to be proud of. There are some things to really focus in on the things that we're doing and how can we enhance those and improve those in order to keep this momentum accelerating, because that's where we want to be. Subgroups in math. Again, this is the first time we have our African American subgroup. But if you take a look at the subgroups, again, you can see the free and reduced lunch in math increased quite a bit, quite significantly. The IEP dropped quite significantly. So again, that's something that we need to focus on. Small increase in the white subgroup and a small increase in the Hispanic subgroups. next to discussion topics. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna turn it over, as far as this, you need to get this. I'm gonna turn it over to Steve Duraka, who is going to talk a little bit about what the junior high has been doing on our Mondays, on freshman Mondays. And then we'll turn it over to some of our elementary school principals as well, so we can share that.
I don't think I need the clicker. Do I click this?
No. Take it the whole.
And just so the board knows, there is a copy of the schedule that's available on our website and that was shared, but we also provided a paper copy for you of what the first trimester professional development schedule is at your table.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. Yeah, I'm the principal at Hauser Junior High School. It's a privilege to be here to speak with all of you and the community as well. I'm going to just real briefly talk about some of the professional development opportunities we've had since the beginning when teachers came back in August. And so I guess I'll start by saying, you know, at Hauser we have an administrative leadership team, structurally speaking, and then we have a Hauser leadership team, which is made up of grade level team members. And so it's those two teams working in concert that kind of plan the professional development that takes place at Hauser. And so what I handed out to you was sort of how we began this school year, and it really became a situation where, you know, as I entered into this position last year, we began at sort of looking at what are some of our priorities, what are some of the things that we need to examine as I step in as principal. And one of the things that we did was look at, well, we need a consistent student management system. And so back in August, we started with the development of what you have here in front of you, which is a draft, which is our positive behavioral support system. And so it's kind of aligned with a national program called Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And so what I've given you there is on August 25th, the Hauser leadership team and the entire Hauser staff began the development and creation of the 3 pillars that will guide us in Hauser, or at Hauser, and that is to act respectfully, be responsible, and choose to be positive. It's those 3 things, along with then the creation of a T-chart, which aligns office managed and administratively managed behaviors. That was developed in here as well. You'll notice that we spent a considerable amount of time developing a behavioral matrix, which outlines the 3 pillars into locales, meaning what does it look like to be respectful, be responsible, and be positive in the hallway? What does it look like to be respectful, responsible, and positive in the cafeteria, in the classroom? And so we began to define these, and then our future goals are really to sort of come up with a curriculum that teaches these behaviors, come up with a positive reward system on how to reward positive behavior, and then also to put in place a data tracking system. So that was the way we started off on August 25th. On 26th, we used our time to plan our curriculum. Our Common Core alignment teams were used to continue the scope and sequence for math and English language arts, and our non-core curricular areas were also working towards the scope and sequence activity to align our curriculum and to align non-ELA, non-math curriculum to Common Core standards. On September 8th, our first Monday PD, we began developing our building norms. We looked at the characteristics of high-achieving schools and then employed a survey to rank those pieces. It is then on September 15th that we began to look at, as a Hauser team, we began to look at, well, what were our top 4 priorities in terms of those high-achieving schools. We identified that what is most important to Hauser is effective leadership, high standards and expectations for all students, high levels of collaboration and communication, and a clear and shared focus, which is why on September 15th, we then went back to work on creating a positive behavioral support system, which is at that time when we developed the matrix that I shared with you guys this evening. On September 22nd and September 29th, then we went back to our Common Core alignment teams and our non-core curricular areas, also worked on their scope and sequence activity to again align all their lessons and units to Common Core state standards. And then yesterday on our October 6th Professional Development Day, we had our grade level teams meet to manage their RTI caseloads. We looked at our students that were at Tier 2 and Tier 3 in grades 6, 7, and 8th grades and began identifying their MAP scores. We look at their accommodations, or excuse me, the interventions that we can provide for them. And so that in terms of professional development, Mondays brings us up to today for Hauser Junior High School. So at this time, then I would hand it over to Casimir.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to share with you what the elementary buildings have been doing in regard to professional development since the beginning of the year. Some of the professional development aligns along with Hauser, which it should. In the beginning, our first day, we spoke about the characteristics of high-achieving schools. And we examined that at each one of the elementary buildings. And from there, we created a needs assessment that we put out for each one of the staffs to answer in terms of where they ranked and how they felt in terms of where they stood with levels of collaboration and leadership and all the things that Mr. Jaraka spoke of. It was also a time in that first opening PLD for some principals, because a couple of us were new, and so we also had to establish some common grounds and start building some relationships with our staff. We started speaking also about common expectations school-wide and looking at the same type of matrix of being responsible, being safe, and being respectful, and how we're going to communicate that to our students, which would align along with our rigorous communication goal. Other principals who had a year of service already within their schools chose that time to reflect upon the past year academically and socially, and their successes and their challenges, and how they can make improvements and grow moving forward. The following PLD that next week, we looked back and we took the needs assessment and we presented it to our staffs, and we looked at where the results were. And we also brought in our district goals and priorities that were in the working stages at that point. And we shared them with our staffs, and we started to say, okay, well, what does that look like at the building level? Like, what are our responsibilities? And we started to develop something along the lines of what we would consider SMART goals. So, like, how are we going to create specific and measurable, attainable goals, for each one of our buildings that align with the district goals and priorities? And so the staffs, specifically, they looked at academic excellence and they looked at rigorous communication. And so they collaborated among one another and decided and came up with specific goals that they were going to be doing. And so it's been a work in progress, and we're finalizing all of those the building level goals and priorities currently right now. The following 2 weeks, just as Mr. Jaraka had spoken, we looked at the SYNC solution, we looked at Common Core state standards, and we collaborated at a grade level, in grade level teams in the larger buildings at Ames and at Central, and then at Blythe and Hollywood, we did kind of cross grades. We did kindergarten, first grade, second, third grade, and we talked about resources, how students were responding to the instruction at the different grade levels, what resources we had selected that worked well and were, truly Common Core driven and aligned, what needed tweaking, And then we took those ideas from a building base, and then the following week, we met at a district-wide level. So district-wide, grade level teams met together. Support staff met either individually within their own groups or within grade level teams, depending on that need. And they all shared their insights and their findings from the building level. And then finally, just yesterday, we started to dig a little bit deeper into response to intervention. And I know that the rest of the team will be speaking about that shortly. But basically, how are we using our support personnel? How are we using our math interventionist, our reading specialist, our resource teachers to maximize instruction? But also, what happens when support staff is servicing other students in the building and it's the classroom teacher? How does his or her instruction look? How do we still differentiate education and give our children the best and most rigorous instruction available? And so that was where we ended yesterday. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, me again. No. Yeah, that was pretty fast, though, last time. So, in front of you, you should have a kind of a checklist of our progress on the Common Core implementation.
It's page 3 of the professional development handout.
This is a slide that we shared last year, and this again kind of shows you where we are as far as progress in our goals to become Common Core online. I will say this is a work in progress, and it's our teachers are working tremendously hard to do a ton of work in a short period of time. I think it was Bill House who said that teachers are up at all hours of the night. I get emails at like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's from teachers that are working, and so I want to make it my priority to be there when they need me. So I appreciate the work that they're doing, but they are putting in an unbelievable amount of hours in implementation. It's not an easy process. It isn't always as smooth as the original plans are laid out to be, but those Mondays have been incredible in allowing teachers to collaborate, allowing teachers to really revise and enhance their lessons, both past and future, because we always want to reflect on what we did, so when we're focusing on standards again, we can even improve on that delivery. We were going to do that. Okay, so this is the handout that the board has. Our goal was to identify CCAT members. We've done that. You can see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 isn't fully completed yet. Some of it's ongoing. But the parts that we have completed in phase 3, grade level teams plan a comprehensive unit guided by Common Core outcomes. We finished unit 1 in ELA and math. New Common Core aligned formative and summative assessments. Those are ongoing. We have more unit assessments right now. We're starting to design some of the formative assessments, but this is a key area of focus for us. September 2012, grade levels implement first units of study. We have 2 ongoing pieces still. Grade levels formally assess ELA and math units during grade level meetings. We are formally assessing the units consistently. And grade level summative assessment of ELA and math units. What's been neat is we've been using Google Docs and other softwares to communicate, to revise, to enhance lessons outside of these once a week Mondays. So if somebody has a great idea or somebody has some insight, each grade level has a Google Doc that they're communicating on as well. So one of the nicest things I've heard about the process so far is that it's really brought teachers together as a district. And I think that's critical for us as a learning community to improve our instruction for kids. Some of our next steps. Full implementation of the new Common Core aligned curriculums in ELA and math, completed by 2015. We'll go through all of our units this year, so we'll have that full information stage then. It won't be fully implemented until then because we're continuing to track it along the way. But it doesn't mean that, there's going to be a lot of summer work, or summer opportunities, I should say. Because we're going to continuously improve this curriculum. Revisions throughout the years I talked about. Professional development throughout the year, again, those Mondays, they've been really helpful. We're continuing to identify learning gaps and areas for acceleration throughout the year. I'm going to talk a little bit more as we get into RTI, but as we increase the rigor and the standards and expectations have increased, we are noticing gaps, grade level gaps in where our students are from our old curriculum to a new curriculum. We have, students that have never experienced a learning gap before are now experiencing some gaps because conceptually things weren't taught at that grade level before, and now they are. And so we're building background knowledge. We're really trying to help fill those gaps while we're implementing the standards. And it is an accelerated pace because of the timing of everything. But we're also focusing on that acceleration. I think I came here my first time ever speaking to the board, and I had said the Common Core standards are our baseline. They're not where we ultimately strive to be, right? So we need to focus on that acceleration piece. We need to focus on, okay, so what do we do if students know it? Where do we go from there? So spending time in each unit during professional development, focusing on that end as well. Okay. And our goal is, once we fully align and fully have, our teachers have mastered the standards. One of the beautiful things about the way we're doing this is that our teachers are owning the standards. They're really knowing the standards left and right. They're making instructional decisions based on not necessarily what page 25 tells them to do, but based on what the standards mean, what this means, and what the student objectives are. Our goal is to revise our report card system in 2016, especially elementary, to be more, to align more with the standards-based report card system. I would love to do that this year, and just be honest and say that right now our focus is really on Common Core and alignment, and I think that it's just a lot. There's very a lot going on. I think 2016 is a very realistic time to be able to do that. Okay, these are the couple slides that I'm just going to take real quick. You'll see on the PowerPoint, it says response to intervention, and underneath it is instruction. And I put that for two reasons. One is I will refer to it as response to instruction. It's not to confuse anybody, but it's kind of what I believe RTI really is. RTI is a program to support students in how they are responding to instruction. Okay? That isn't just students that qualify for Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 support, right? That's our accelerated gifted students. And that is our students that are in the Tier 1 classroom all day long. It's how students respond to the instruction. So if I created this, I would change the name, but it's response to intervention. And when response to intervention was first passed, this is what this, the state of Illinois told school districts that your typical classroom looks like. 80% of your kids should be challenged by Tier 1 instruction, okay? Meaning that 80% of your students are in a good place in your gen ed classroom. Of course, you differentiate, you do what you can, but you do need to do, I should say. Those supports are there, and students succeed in the Tier 1 classroom without additional supports. 15% of students in a typical classroom are, might qualify for Tier 2 services. Okay? Tier 2 services are very strategic services. Whenever possible, they should have it in the classroom. They should still be in the classroom. But they focus on very specific skills that students may have fallen outside the benchmarks in at least 2 assessments. And the reason we say at least 2 assessments is sometimes you have a score that doesn't really seem to match the other, so you want to make sure that wasn't just a bad day for the student. So you want to make sure that you have the data to really understand what the student needs. So that's Tier 2 students. About 15% of those students. It could be different smaller groups in the classroom with students. It could be different different resources. It could be a different type of instructional approach with students. It could be pushing in a reading resource teacher or a math or TI specialist at that time. And then 5% of your students should, I shouldn't say should, because I don't really necessarily agree with this, but 5% of a typical classroom would fall into the Tier 3. that Tier 3 are students that need they need intensive strategic interventions. Never was this triangle built to say that you're one of those 5%, so that's where you stay. Okay? No, what it is it's our job as educators to provide the services for those students in Tier 3 so they can become successful, and they will move down the tiers so that they no longer need the interventions. I mean, that's the goal of RTI. In my world, this would be a diamond, because you have your accelerated learners too, that need interventions, need different responses to instruction as well. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay. But I wanted to show you, the reason I showed you that triangle first is I wanted to show you what Riverside District 96 looked like before Common Core cut scores came, before the Common Core aligned assessments came, right? This was District 96's RTI triangle. 91% of our students were Tier 3, meaning they were at least where they needed to be, okay, if not higher. Right? Again, this doesn't show the other side. 8% of our students needed those strategic interventions, okay? We were at that 90%, okay? And with support, so those 8%, as we saw on the ISAT scores, should be, the goal would be to get them into that 91%. This is where District 96 is now, okay? We've got a new test, ISAT, fully aligned Common Core, 1 year. And increased rigor on the tests, increased standards in the classroom, okay? Now, as a district, we have 76% of our students that are achieving at that Tier 1 level. 21%, this is based on last year's scores that I showed earlier, 21% in Tier 2 and 3% in Tier 3. Okay? The biggest eye-opener there is look at that Tier 2. Okay? As those standards increase, some of our students on for the first time are not achieving at where they were achieving before as far as their business standards. So RTI is critical. It's a critical component of what we need to do. Okay? Because as it was said earlier, this can define our school district, District 96, okay? We need to really focus on RTI supports so that kids are moving tiers, kids are moving back down to that was reading, and this is math, okay? In math, prior to all the changes, with 95% of our kids, okay, were meeting standards. The reality, though, to some of those kids were meeting standards when they first walked in the classroom for that grade level, right? Because it was just a benchmark assessment. Now we have 78%, 90%, 3%. What changed? Standards. What changed? The test. What changed? The expectations. And that's where, as it was said earlier, that's where we are now focusing our instruction to meet those needs. We have some building principles here that I'm going to talk a little bit about what they're doing in their schools to help ensure that students are receiving what they need and help ensure that our students are, RTI is not, it's not a sentence, it's not a place where kids should stay. So how they're helping students move through the RTI system. Let's go, we'll start with elementary.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Gannon. Good evening, Board of Education, and welcome to our newest board members. Congratulations once again, Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Boyd. Welcome aboard, and it's a privilege to be here with you this evening. RTI, Response to Intervention, Dr. Gannon referred to it as response to instruction. I like to look at it as just best practice. No longer are we expecting students to conform to how we teach. We, as educators, have the responsibility to conform to how they learn, and that pretty much is at the crux of what RTI is. RTI starts as soon as the kids are walking in the door. So we're looking at a variety of different measures. So we assess our students with our measures of academic progress, which is our MAP test. We assess them with our Fontes and Pinnell reading assessment, which is referred to as F&P, and we also look at our Ames Web. We look at reading curriculum-based measurements and math curriculum-based measurements, and those can be in the areas of math computation and math concepts and application, math computation, reading curriculum-based measurements, looking at think that's it. Yeah, I knocked out all those. It sounds like a lot, but what we do is we have a team that comes in to assess our students as quickly as possible. These assessments don't take a long time. We need to be very sensitive to instructional time lost, and we want to make sure we get in, we assess our students, and we get out. We want to grab that data as quickly as possible. We have a team, so it's not just done by classroom teachers. It's done. We have a reading specialist, a math specialist, school psychologist, school social worker, classroom teachers. We're all working collaboratively to assess these students, and like I said, as quickly, as effectively, and efficiently as possible. Each building then has, and we refer to it at Ames as the data collaboration team, but it's a team of individuals, which is made up of those individuals that I just mentioned, that takes a look at the data. So we have data meetings, and we put these up, we put it up on the wall, we have projectors, and we look at the data, we look at the students, who is in tier 1, who is in tier 2, who is in tier 3, and we look at who's going to benefit from staying with that core instruction, the tier 2, how are we going to meet those tier 2 students who were in that yellow part of the triangle that Dr. Gannon just showed you, by having our classroom teachers work collaboratively with our specialists, pushing into that classroom as much as possible, going in and delivering interventions with those students to try to, and Dr. Gander referred to it at the end, it's a revolving door. We don't want them always to be tier 2. We want to get them back into tier 1. That's the goal. Tier 3, we look at our tier 3 students as well, and how are the specialists going to meet our tier 3 learners by pulling them out with intense, frequent interventions. And that's where I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Gantz. He's going to take it from there to explain a little bit about these interventions.
Sure. You know, and Mr. Grimman mentioned those data meetings, and those data meetings are being held on a consistent basis. We have a cycle of 6 to 8 week period of time where we sit back and review the data that we've collected, and we administer some of those probes as we progress monitor those students throughout that process to make sure, number one, that we're meeting the needs of those students, and the interventions that we've designed to support those students are meeting their academic needs and helping to close that achievement gap for students. Those interventions are delivered in, as Mr. Grimm said, in and out of the classroom, and the length of time that the student's out of the classroom or the intensity of the intervention is driven by the student need. So the more need the student has, based and demonstrated on the data that we've collected from the classroom teacher or from the assessments, helps to drive what we need to do with those students, what the teachers need to do, the specialists that we have within the building need to do to support that student growth. You know, one important person that I think that all the building principals are recognizing, that psychologists that we have in the building on a full-time basis this year is really helping with this process, because they're really helping with, specifically with the principals, to really help us be able to pull that data apart, to look at student growth, to monitor that growth, to design interventions for students, and make sure that we're following through with the data, so that we're working together as a team to make sure the students' needs are being identified. And then one of the things that Dr. Gannon pointed out with the triangles and that 80% and the goal of having at least 80% of the students in that green area or in that tier 1. When it's below that 80%, as a building and as teachers and as principals, we look and say, what do we need to do in just general instruction within a whole class environment to meet the needs of all the students that are there? Because sometimes you can view that anything under that 80%, that's a core instruction issue. And a lot of the work that the teachers are doing this year, and I cannot, Bill said earlier, I cannot commend the teachers enough for the work that they have done to really identify the holes that are in the curriculum based on the new rigors that we've put in place for students, identifying what those are and how we're going to fill those, because it can't just be, well, the student didn't have the skill and they got into 4th grade because the bar was raised, so therefore they're going to go to 5th grade with that skill. We have to figure out when and where through an intervention process or core instruction we can find that time and provide that instruction to build, to fill those holes, so to speak, in student learning, to increase student progress and performance at school. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jaraka again for middle school perspectives.
Yeah, and I guess in many ways I would piggyback off of what both Todd and Peter are talking about. However, there's a slight adjustment at the middle school level, really because of the structural component of a middle school in comparison to an elementary school, because we are grade level team. We kind of look at the structures that exist at Hauser to help us align our RTI interventions, and then take really a collaborative approach at the grade levels to try and get this work done. So we implement this in math and reading. It is a pull-out program that exists to pull students from primarily their encore classes. So there's sort of a 3 periods throughout the Hauser school day for students that are encore classes, and we identify those students through their math scores, again, and also their ISAT scores as either being level 2 or level 3 students. Then our student support coordinator, Lynn Janik, meets with each grade level team every week to look at each one of our students that have been identified at Tier 2 and Tier 3. We examine their MAP scores, their ISAT scores. We do data meetings at that time to examine where students are. We also examine their interventions. What interventions are these students receiving? Is it working? And so now that we've finished our fall MAP tests, this last week we've had our data meetings, obviously using yesterday as well. And so then we have really a number of individuals who help get this work done from the instructional standpoint. So there's the structural standpoint and then the instructional standpoint, and that is our reading interventionists, Sarah Clark, Sean Woody, Estelle Tarrant, who use AIMSweb as progress monitoring, who use Reading Advantage for comprehension, Vocabulary for Success for vocabulary purposes, and 6-minute solutions to gauge reading fluency. And then we have some of our math teachers, Mrs. Douches, Mr. Harvalis, Ms. Banholzer, Ms. Dillon, and Ms. Arazi, who use an ALEX program, which is quite intense, and it takes kids through skills at math, helps them gauge their own data and see where they are. It's a computer-based program. And so we, at this point at Hauser, we have 25 students at the 6th grade level in reading RTI services, 25 at math at the 6th grade level. In 7th grade, which is our smallest class size, about 165, we have 8 kids in reading interventions and 17 kids in math interventions. And in 8th grade, we have 10 in reading interventions and 21 in math interventions. And I say all that with the understanding that there is some fluidity in this. As we meet on a regular basis, we determine whether kids need to continue the RTI services or can move back into the 80% that Dr. Gannon was referring to earlier. So that would be the Hauser update.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Fano, Director of Innovation and Instructional Technology, and tonight just going to go over some of the instructional technology goals for this school year. I'm the Director of Innovation and Instructional Tech. That department, we really have two sides. There's an operational services side, and then the instructional side. These goals are really focused on that instructional side. There are also some operational goals within the department as well. These 6 areas are some key areas that we're focusing on, but not limited to this within instructional tech. But one of the things we really want to do is establish some measurable goals based on 21st century skills to assess and redefine our one-to-one device program. We currently have a one-to-one program in students grades 5 through 8. And we really want to try to identify how can we assess the program. And then also with redefining, looking at, well, is the MacBook that the students are currently given, is that the device that we should continue to use moving forward? So have begun the process of setting up appointments with other districts that have successful MacBook programs in place, successful iPad programs in place, successful Chromebook and Android tablet programs in place to identify some attributes of successful programs and also look at how those programs function and how students utilize and leverage those devices. But in terms of measuring the establishing measurable goals, what I'm in the process of also doing is identifying a 21st century skills assessment for students that is aligned to the ISTE net standards and to Common Core standards. What this will allow us to do is really assess the program, not really looking to, students would take the assessment, but not all students. Identify some grade levels that would take it every few years, but really for programmatic evaluation, to see where student skills are relative to where they should be with 21st century skills. What we should hopefully identify with that are any gaps and areas that we can improve the program. We also want to develop some district-wide technology guidelines and benchmarks based on those ISTE nets and Common Core standards. We've already conducted one of several needs assessments with staff to identify any technology professional development needs that exist within the district and develop a plan to address those identified needs. And finally, one of the other large items for this school year is the park assessment, and making sure that we are, as a district, are ready for that assessment come springtime. There are, from an infrastructure and standpoint, from making sure that devices are compatible with the assessment, but then also proctoring and also making sure that time is allotted properly for the assessments to take place. And again, while these are some of the larger points of the instructional technology goals, there's a lot that comes underneath those, and then also some operational, many operational goals as well. And with that, turn it over to Mrs. Banjo.
Good evening, I'm Pam Shaw, the Director of Special Education and Student Services, and I'd like to share with you tonight some of the goals that we have in looking at special education and student services as a whole in the district. These are three rather umbrella type goals that have many little components underneath the goals, but the first one is to further develop and refine the district's special education processes and procedures to ensure that we meet student needs and are in compliance. In this goal, we're looking at not only compliance with IEP processes and procedures, but also looking at our instructional practices and processes and procedures as we work with students with special needs in the district. We are going about this task this year by looking at our special education leadership team, which we have redefined a bit this year. The team is made up of one special education teacher, representative for each of the 5 schools, and then we have one related service representative who represents the related service groups such as the occupational therapist and physical therapist, social worker, psychologist, and speech and language pathologist. And in that meeting, where we meet once a month, we are able to then talk about some of the questions instructionally or just IEP processes and procedures that the teams in their buildings have questions about, further define those processes. Some of that work was started last year with the interim directors, but we're continuing to work on those areas. And we are then able to get back immediately almost as the teams meet in the buildings, and as related service providers are meeting monthly in their like groups, they're able to share any practices that we're putting in place, and we are going to then define something a little bit more specifically where everyone will have guidance to review that. The other thing we're looking at is to refine the child find and student services team and RTI processes. And this is a large area that we're looking at. This includes preschool screening processes and identification of students requiring special education services as identified through the RTI process. You've heard a lot of discussion tonight about the RTI process, and we have student services teams, which are some of those specific professionals that you heard us talk about who are there to support students in the buildings. And as we have had processes for student services teams and RTI teams in the building, and you heard a little bit tonight how they are starting to meld together and work together in conjunction with one another in order to look at data and what students need. The psychologists that we hired this year, we really worked hard to find psychologists who were well versed in the RTI process and their previous work, and they have really helped the team move towards looking at this data. And as we talked, the idea is that students not staying in interventions too long and that we're able to move them down. But there are those times when we look at the duration and the intensity of the interventions, and when we look at that and we're not able to pull away, that's when sometimes we need to use that data to help make a child eligible for special education services. So that's why it's very critical that your RTI teams and your student services teams work together in conjunction to make sure that that data is appropriate to use for making other decisions. And then the last one is to address the over-identification of students with special needs in the district. Districts typically have about 10% of students with special needs, and we're more to the 18-19%. And I think that with the RTI process that we're looking at, years ago, students, in order to get out those extra supports, we needed to make them eligible for special education. But there are ways now that we can provide interventions, give students support, without making them eligible for special education, which is a very serious decision to make as we're working with students. So hopefully with the RTI processes, looking at more of the team teaching and inclusive practices, we will be able to address some of these needs. Thank you.
Since I still have this, can I jump in? As I'm watching the presentations, I just want to share one thing is it's somewhat difficult to present this stuff in isolation. And what I mean by that is all this work is done together. I know we had our instructional technology slide, we had our special education, special services slide, and we had our Common Core slide, but really it's all the work needs to be done together. And we clearly have some room to improve. I mean, we looked at the achievement level and ISAT versus students in special education, and that's an area that doesn't just fall on Mrs. Shaw to work on, and that's a district instructional priority as well. Thank you.
All right.
And I just want to conclude with, because Brian, I have to have the last word. But I have to conclude with, the board sets the direction. You've approved our goals and priorities. We've established them as a district leadership team. We thought it was important for everybody to speak and share what was happening at not only the district level, the department level, but the building level and at the classroom level. And like Brian said, we're all working together to mobilize this plan and to continue the high standards for our kids and to be a high achieving district. So, thank you.
Thank you. You guys officially got that done in less than an hour, so kudos to you. All right, so we said we'd hold discussion until after, so we're in that discussion agenda item level, and I'd like to just break it down by each high-level topic, and we can proceed through. If you'll indulge me, I'll just kick it off because I did have a couple questions throughout. But right at the beginning, with the grade level meetings going on with the early release and the other professional development time, you said principals are responsible for a grade level. Is that the same grade level like each month, or do they rotate? How does that work?
Well, right now, we've only had one, because we've only had one extended Monday. And
Right.
so we had, we're going to keep it as is for right now, develop some continuity, and then possibly at the second trimester, maybe switch things around so that not only do they get knowledge and familiarity of the different grade level standards, but then also work with different staff members too. So then they have a comprehensive overview of K-5 curriculum, as opposed to just the kindergarten or first grade curriculum. They get to see it all.
Okay. Quick question about the ISAT to PARC transition. This was something I noticed for Brian. How will PARC scores even be compared to ISAT, since it's a completely different test? How do we, when you show that year-to-year, 2013-14 to 2014-15 chart, what is it going to mean? How do we think about that?
That's a great question, and you asked somebody who really likes to see those comparisons. I'm not so sure they're going to compare, and in a couple reasons for that. One is PARC. The PARC assessment, districts have learned a lot from the pilot, and the PARC assessment is an online assessment. As long as our infrastructure can support it, it'll be an online assessment. So there's some additional kind of just like technology maneuverings and understandings that aren't part of the ISAT, which complicate things a little bit. But from everything I can gather, PARC I think is going to be, even more rigorous than the ISAT test. So I haven't seen any comparisons yet. It's a great question, and I hope to learn more, but I'm not so sure we're going to have really great comparisons between the two. This might be a trend starting next year.
Okay.
And I don't know, and if I could add to that, I don't know if we can compare, because ISAT was a one-time summative assessment. This is going to be a 2-time assessment. Park's going to be performance-based, as far as in March. So they'll have some type of a mid-year review. Then they're going to have an end-of-the-year summative in May. So there's going to be 2 points that they're going to be looking at, where an ISAT was just a one-time. So I don't know if you can really do an apples-to-apple comparison from Park to ISAT.
Okay.
I'll try.
Okay, and the other question I have on the testing is, will the subgroups continue to be reported, and will they be the same? Will they change?
As far as I know, they're going to be the same, and they will
Okay.
still be recorded. There's a whole, the NCLB issue is, it's still there, but it's kind of in a different place right now, so we don't exactly know what's going to happen there, but I fully anticipate that the subgroups will remain.
Okay. All right. So for the other professional development meetings, I guess Steve just stepped out, but I don't know. The question I had for Hauser was the positive behavior support system. This is a document that was shared. Is this, what's going to be it says draft on it, I assume that's still the case. Who's going to be the ultimate audience for this going forward? Maybe he's coming back, I don't know. Yeah. I'm going to spring one on you, Steve. Is the PBSS document that says draft right now, who's going to be ultimately the audience for this? Is this for the staff? Is it for parents? Is it for kids?
It's all of those, really.
Okay.
Because it's in a developmental stage at this point, and it typically takes about a year to develop a system like this. We would start out by making this part of what would be seemingly a student handbook for teachers, students, and obviously the community to all see. The matrix piece in there is really where the students and the teachers would focus on the curricular portion and the teaching of positive behaviors. But that's a document, at this point it's developed in its development stage, but for the future it would absolutely be part of the public process.
Okay. And are you going, as part of the document development, are you going to develop a process or plan to roll that out to parents and students?
Well, absolutely. I think at this point with, having been here for just 5 or 6 weeks, before I would do that, I would make sure that the product is clean and clear. And then from that point, this is not going to be something that I'm going to do next month. This is going to take some time before this gets communicated out. I would want what I communicate out to be clean and polished before communicating that out to the community as a whole. And so that's why I kind of shared with you that this is a draft. And we are in the process of development at this point. And I've worked on structures like this before, and it typically takes about a year to develop that.
Okay. One last one, and I think I've touched on CCSS and PD stuff. So with the going forward with the CCSS, I guess before Brian, it was on this chart. You say there's some ongoing activities. Are there actual milestones, or how will we know we're on track with that activity, I guess is what I'm looking for.
So, great question. There's actually a slide that we didn't include that had some of the accomplishments in the different stages. But as far as the ongoing stuff, one thing that I think we really need to look at is, the assessment pieces. As soon as we start to incorporate some consistent formative assessments in the curriculum, that'll be a huge accomplishment for us, because what's happening now is that, and when I say formative, it doesn't mean that we're going to pull kids off the test. It just means we're having very standards-based assessment questions. It might be 1 or 2 questions, but we're really being proactive, and we're really saying where our students are at, both at a pre-test level, during instruction, after instruction, and then at a post-test level. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and I know I've talked about databases like Illuminate and other programs. That's just the name of one, but there's some systems that I am interested in taking a look at that provide those very research rigor-based formative and summative assessments that we can incorporate into our curriculum. And I think crossing that bridge, whether it's through a database system or teacher written, will be a big step in that process.
Okay. I've got more questions on RTI, instructional technology and special ed, but before I take over the whole meeting, I'll let.
You are the chair.
All right. Well,
I have a question about the ISAT results. My understanding of the Common Core curriculum with regard to reading is really, the only change is the substance that they're reading. It's transitioning from fiction to more nonfiction. Is that correct?
It's one of the big shifts.
Okay.
There are 6 different shifts, but that's a major shift, yeah.
For reading, okay. But it's basically, it's the math curriculum that's going to change, and obviously it's already changed substantially.
Yeah. Some of I mean, it's when you get into the language and other pieces of the reading curriculum, there are some significant changes. When you look at the reading, it's really, there's 6 different shifts. One of them is the more informative texts. In math, the gaps are a little bit different because there are specific skills that might have been taught in the previous grade level, like 4th grade, that are not taught in 2nd grade. And likewise, and because math is so cyclical, that when you change that process, it makes it creates difficulties, because now our kids are in 2nd grade and they might be learning some stuff they used to be in 4th grade, or they're in 4th grade and there's something in the Common Core curriculum that was taught in 2nd grade that they didn't get exposed to. So there's a little bit more gaps there, but our kids did respond fairly well.
Okay. Just the explanation given for the dips in our scores was that on 2012-13, we were only partially aligned with Common Core, whereas 2013-14, we're fully aligned. I would think that based upon that, the dip would be in math, but yet we improved in math and we dipped significantly in reading.
I would agree. I mean, I was pleased, in one sense, with how well our kids did in math. I don't know if that's going to be the typical. I mean, I would expect the same thing. And I think different schools achieve at different levels, but overall as a district, I think we did well. In the reading part, the rigor and the text complexity in reading has been increased, so kids were exposed to higher level texts on the reading test as well, so that influences some of their ability to comprehend, because there's something called Lexile levels, and Lexile levels in Common Core are increases the rigor. So when you have a Common Core online test, what kids are reading in 4th grade for the reading portion of the test looks different than what they used to read in 4th grade before ISAT.
So is it when you say it's a more different text, is it vocabulary?
It's kind of all of it. There could be higher level vocabulary. There's when you look at content, probably not so much, but when you look at lengths of sentences and different types of words that were used, it's all kind of created on the formula of text complexity.
So Lexile,
it's harder to comprehend.
The Lexile course, the Lexile score thing doesn't change. It's just there are higher levels that are expected. Is that it?
So what would be expected at 4th grade now, the Lexile level is higher, and that's to close that gap between the end of high school and college and career readiness. So the pieces that they're reading are working as well. And then there's different types of questions that go along with that too. It's not so much, it's not just multiple choice anymore. It's not just there's one multiple choice question, but there's a lot more analytical questions, a lot more taking evidence from the text and proving your answer. So it's a whole different framework of response as well.
I had one other question for the CCSS. What you mentioned report cards on one of the slides. What does give if you could an example maybe of what a Common Core aligned report card might look like, and how does that differ from what we're doing?
Sure. So there are a lot of different examples out there, but basically what it is it's the report card itself has the standard, right? The standard that you're supposed to master in 4th grade per se. And then there's a level, and again, this is a big project because you have to come to consistency on what a 1, 2, 3, or 4 means, or however you decide to do that, but it means to master the standard, and there's a level, there's a score that you associate with each standard, and that shows students' level of mastery. So it's very connected. You're teaching that standard, students have been assessed on that standard several times. This is where the student's performance is on that standard.
Okay.
So it looks a little bit different than what we have now because although we have some alignment to the standards, it's not really where it needs to be, and there's also, in order to make this a full, Common Core line report card, there's still a lot of teaching and understanding of master that needs to happen.
And does that look different at Hauser, since, you usually get a report card with each period, teacher, whatever, but I mean, within those subject areas, there's going to be different standards going on, so.
There are, and those are conversations that we need to have with RB and the high school as well, because we need to make sure that how we're reporting student performance aligns with what RB is expecting. And then, so our students are correctly placed, or correctly challenged. So there's another level there to ensure consistency between the junior high and the high school.
Is MAP testing and the other assessments used to track performance aligned with Common Core?
Last year we implemented the Common Core math test for the first time. So, yes.
Okay.
It was just made available last year for the first time, too.
Okay. Is the data that MAP is coming up with overall for student achievement, is that matching, reflect the ISAT results?
Historically, it's predicted it fairly well. What we don't know is what it's going to look like with Park. But MAP to ISAT has been a fairly good predictor. So basically, there's a report in MAP in the fall that you can print out to show where students are for their trajectory to meet standards on the ISAT test. Again, it's hard to say without Park what that's going to look like.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on the PD or Common Core?
I guess my question on Common Core and professional development is, what role is Sync Solution playing in all of this year?
So this year, Sync Solution is, we used to have a program called Curriculum Mapper. And that was used kind of, I don't think it was consistent throughout the district. But basically, what Sync Solution does is it provides us a platform to load resources for our curriculum. And so when students are designing their lesson plans, they can go into Sync Solution and they can take that resource and transfer it over like as a hyperlink onto their lesson plans, design lesson plans, have everything they need right in front of them for that day's lesson. It's not a lesson planner. It's really a platform to house curriculum, so teachers aren't running all over the place trying to find what they need. Currently, we've only committed to for half the school year, because now it's like kind of a full, everybody's using it now.
Great, so it's in use?
It's in use, yeah.
It's in use,
Yeah.
and is it fully, let's say, is the curriculum fully loaded for the entire year, or for the entire curriculum?
Yes and no. It is, as far as the planning that we've done for the curriculum, but it's, that through our Mondays has been consistently changing. We're adding stuff, we're enhancing stuff, so there'll be new materials that are added to it. But we've designed all units, 1 through 12, 1 through 10.
And is that what you're doing on Mondays?
Mondays is more, it's really more the instruction part. I mean, the Sync Solution isn't the instruction piece.
Okay.
They talk about how they're using the Sync Solution to effectively write lesson plans, and then, how they're delivering instruction, but it's not, we really try to focus on the instruction piece on the Mondays.
Okay.
Well, how does Sync Solution get updated? Just walk me through. Is it by grade level? Is it by standard? Is it by what?
So right now, we have course planners that can update it at grade level. And the only updating that happens right now is during our professional development when teams are together. And they collaborate, they share resources, they discuss how things work, and then if they want to add a resource that the team agrees is a good resource, they add it there. Eventually it could be something where teachers can just upload, but we're trying to keep some consistency with really the training and understanding of the standards and training and understanding of the resources to meet the standards.
Okay.
And other than Mondays, when is the team together?
It kind of depends, and it's been a little bit of a struggle because Ames and Central have time during the school day to meet as grade level teams. We talked today about maybe Blythe Park, trying to get over to Ames a little bit more often to collaborate with Ames and kind of trying to set up partnership schools. Because the one classroom schools are, and we talked there, they love the Mondays when everybody's together. That's only once a month.
Okay.
So we're trying some virtual stuff and some other ways to get them to collaborate.
Okay.
Are we completely, do we have all standards mapped at this point?
We do, yes.
Okay.
We have them mapped, but I'm not going to say that we have them mapped at the level that we're going to say this is where we need to be,
Okay.
But yes, we do.
Okay.
And each of the standards will be assessed 3 times throughout the school year, the way that we have it mapped. So we'll get some good ideas where the kids are at.
And is it fair to say you are currently teaching those standards? Currently? And,
Yeah.
okay.
Brian, I had a question for you regarding the Common Core. My understanding, and I attended your Common Core University last week, and it was helpful for us to understand an idea of how your teachers are using Sync Solutions. The piece that I see is missing, and this is my question for you, is the parent piece. Okay. And my understanding with the Common Core, stop me if I'm wrong here on this, is we don't have one resource book. So with math, I don't have a textbook for 5th grade, right? Now, as the parent with a kid who comes home and can't do that math problem, that was not only my kid's resource, it was mine, because I would open the textbook and read and see, oh, this is how you do this, this is how you want them to do this, and then that piece doesn't appear to be there yet, because what we're seeing coming home is a different homework sheet every night, and may be different from a different textbook each time. But there's no, okay, if my kid's having a problem doing this, the only way that I would see what is the resource for the parent to assist the child, apart from having all of those kids in that class call the teacher and say, hey, I can't do this, which doesn't seem to be an efficient way. Are you developing some sort of system where if you're saying that this classroom teacher is going to be teaching multiplication using this system, that they are going to put that resource maybe on their classroom web page or something? But where is that? Because I'm not seeing that piece coming from to communicating to the parents, which I think is an important thing. Sure. Because if we have the parents on board, they can assist those kids in making that transition with Common Core.
Absolutely. So, and that's in a couple ways. So first of all, you're 100% right, and I say that's been one of our struggles so far. The goal in math wasn't necessarily, I mean, a lot of school districts go into math and they say we're going to do a standards-based curriculum and it's going to be multiple resources and this and that. We are still exploring Common Core online math curricula. There's some good stuff coming out next year. I mean, and I'm on all these little listservs and we email everybody to see what they're using and a lot. It seems like more so in the coming year there's going to be some additional resources that we may decide is a better way to go as far as consistency for materials. But what we're doing now is we have the My Math online resource. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but that should be coming home. There's a lot. There's information for students, information for parents on what how, first of all, what the homework is and what the assignments look like, but also how to help you with that as well. We're also looking at Monday or Friday at this other online resource for everyday math that we still use as well. And there's another parent toolkit component to that as well. Plus the books are online as well. So you have access to the student materials, and you have access to, and in one of the two, if technology works, there's videos of teachers teaching lessons as well. But that is, so those are things we're going to focus on Friday. But that is consistently something that we're looking to do. As far as teacher websites, we're looking at a new platform for websites. And we're hoping that our new platform will allow us to load resources and more information on it for parents as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you're touching on is a need in that we really don't have a learning management system. Which learning management systems are platforms through which teachers and students and parents can access resources and depending on the system, interact. And especially in a one-to-one environment that we have in the grades 5 through 8, it's also a resource that would also benefit that program as well. And as Dr. Gannon talks about evaluating new platforms for teacher websites, many of those platforms are also, there are other modules of learning management systems and other things that, other types of features that could meet needs within the district and help to disseminate and share that curricular information as well.
It's a very high priority for us because it's a missing piece, and we're trying to send home additional information like My Math and Everyday Math, but ultimately we want to have one platform.
The problem with the My Math and Everyday Math, it's in a generalized system. It tells you, well, you work on your math facts, you can do this. But if my kid's coming home and having an issue with this, but I didn't have the sheet that the teacher used at school that day, I just have a homework sheet. I don't know what they were taught. Right. And my understanding from what you did at Common Core University last week is everybody's going to be a little bit different, because Think Solution gives you a resource, gives you a goal, but then it's up to the creativity of the teacher to do what they're doing in the middle, right? So I don't know, looking at a generalized thing, I've got to try and figure this out as the parent. I mean, how is that working?
Sure. Well, the books, there are PDFs of the books, so you'll actually will have the resource at home from the website. You can download the entire books. So that is one way to help. But the other piece about Think Solution is that teachers are using the same resources. It's just we haven't told them exactly how they need to teach, and we've never done that necessarily. That's nothing new. That's the part that at Common Core University is teachers still have the art of teaching, but the resources that we're using are consistent. And then we're going to get parents those resources at home.
So you talk about these PDF books, you say. How's that going to work? Can you explain that?
You log on to the My Math site, and you have access to the whole textbook online, or the whole student resource book.
All right.
And when will that be available? Sorry.
It's available now.
Okay.
It's available now. We should have, letters should be going home any day if they haven't already. But yeah.
It seems like there's been that missing link. Like
I
you talk about these individual pages. And
Yeah, I would suggest that Hauser is my child's in Hauser, and there are definitely learning systems. There's about 4, and you have to go to each one for a different piece of information and gather it all up yourself. And that's a lot of work for a parent who's trying to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah,
and I just have one student, so.
Yeah, and our hope is, and Don and I talked about this a lot, is when we have infrastructure that will support the system in place, which has been difficult. It'll be a lot, it'll be a lot quicker to clean that up because we want you to go to one spot. We want, but we want you to go to one spot with the resource that is most effective for teaching that standard. It might not be Everyday Math page 15 because you just did page 14. You know what I'm saying? We want this to be rigorous, but we're trying to find a platform that'll work for us within our current infrastructure that'll allow parents to go to one spot.
Well, and I think when we look at learning management systems, we also want to look at it holistically in that there's several needs within the district, and I think sometimes what can happen within districts is that, okay, we need to fulfill need 1, so we fulfill it, and then we move on to need 2, and then on need 3. Whereas there's systems that maybe address 6 or 7 needs in one system. And how can we make sure that we're identifying all our needs and making sure that this one platform, at least at a base level, meets the need in order of the individual type of systems that we need. So again, it becomes a one-stop shop for maybe 80% of what we need, and then you add on as needed. So
yeah, and then to be real honest, there were some unexpected technology situations that happened along the way that we had to eliminate some options for those learning systems. Our curriculum was planned and moving forward, and the infrastructure couldn't handle it.
so how about, aren't there publishers publishing hard copy books that can be used for math instruction for 6th grade, and that would be Common Core aligned, and that's we might be able to get some consistency from one math teacher to the next, and having that take-home book, you know, would certainly alleviate these tech problems that occur, and they'll always occur. And some parents are certainly more tech savvy than others, and that goes for the students as well. So I'm wondering if, are we trying to get away from textbooks altogether?
No, there are some, I mean, some companies aren't making textbooks the way that they used to. I mean, a lot of them are kind of, you know, workbook format. Some still make textbooks, but no, we're really working to identify the Common Core line textbook that meets our needs at Riverside. So that is our goal. I mean, if there's a book that meets our needs, that has a rigor, and there's, like I said, there's new stuff coming out. I mean, the textbooks have had 4 years to figure this out. You know, they were swapping labels, you know, and stuff, and a lot of districts have paid the price that way. Not that there's nothing good out there, but we're looking at some stuff. There's some stuff I'm excited about coming out next year. That we were able to get some samples online that I'm sharing with teachers, you know, but we're just waiting, you know, for that right material.
So might a goal be for next fall to have some textbooks that are that we can use?
You know, I'd love to say yes, but it kind of depends on you know, we need to see the textbooks, we need to see the resources, we need to evaluate them.
I think last year we also talked about there wasn't a comprehensive program out there that was 100% aligned to Common Core, whether it was English Language Arts or whether it was math. And a lot of the stuff that we have right now, we're using everyday math. So we're pulling out those skills and say, okay, we can cover skills 1 through 8 with everyday math, but then we're going to use skills 9 through 12 from my math. You know, so we're combining both of those. And to answer your question, you know, Juliet, we haven't come up with a one system in place of, okay, so 1 through 8 are available here for parents to use as a resource, and 9 through 12 are available here for parents to use it. We have to tie those pieces together. And I think because teachers are still, although they're implementing, have we figured out everything of what's aligned yet? Not yet. Because we're still in, you know, first trimester, you know, first month of school, and as we're going through it and we talk and we say, this is really the best resource that meets this skill, and here's the assessment we're going to use to assess that skill, and then now this is our District 96 curriculum. And I think that we're still in the developing stages of that. We have aligned everything, but is it aligned to where we want it to be?
So now you're using Sync Solutions. My understanding is the teacher clicks on it for the day and it pulls up the thing and it says this is your resource for the day and this is your goal or whatever it is. So is there any way to make that available? Because it seems like that's what you're developing into a curriculum, kind of making your own textbook for whatever it is. Is there a way to make that available for parents to access, to say, oh, in 5th grade, if you're looking at this, oh, I can look at the resource the teacher looked at, I can look at the goal that the teacher looked at, so that I can figure out what this lesson means or what this homework is?
It's a really good question, and as I'm thinking about it, probably copyright-wise from Sync Solution, probably not. However, we could look into just, I mean, because really what we're looking at are the resources. The resources are links, and so really just look at copying and pasting those resources and putting them somewhere, you know. And again, that's, you know, we want to have one place, right, for you to go. But that is definitely a possibility.
Or it could even be on, like I said, if it's on the teacher's page that they have, say, this week I'm doing multiplication and this is the resource that I'm using, and they PDF the 3 sheets that say that, then, you know, then I can go to the website and look at that thing. I mean, at least until you figure out if there is one sort of textbook available.
Parents aside, I'm sorry not to interrupt. What are kids using to learn from? Are they strictly looking at a book at school? Are they relying simply on instruction alone?
No, kids have they have a My Math book at school. They have math workbook, and they have the everyday math materials. So kids have a book, but that book hasn't been necessarily going home.
Would it have the resources that parents need just to because sometimes, just as being a former student once upon a time, sometimes it helps, a lot of times it helps to have something to read and look back on to understand something and to go through it that way. So I think that if there are resources in this workbook I have not seen, that would be helpful for both the student and the parent.
Yeah, I think one thing I need to make sure is that those resources are getting home as well. Because there is access. I mean, parents do have access to the resource. I just, honestly, right now, I don't know to what level those have been shared. I thought they went home last week, or the week of Common Core University, so I have to double check on that.
So the backpacks of the kids are getting bigger all the time. I would guess there's still room in the backpack for some of these workbooks and things that you're talking about to come home with the kids. Are the students, do they have to share these textbooks, or do they have?
No, they have their own.
They have their own. Yeah, it would seem as a short-term fix, maybe not a long-term plan, but to start bringing some of these books home. Wouldn't that be a help?
Absolutely.
A couple comments. As far as textbooks, we've heard before, and I've read in many places that just because a math curriculum textbook has got the gold label on it saying Common Core aligned doesn't really mean that that's the case. So we haven't actually adopted a new math textbook in this district for many years. I don't know if there's any math teachers in the district, but there's doing the mapping through Sync Solution. Teachers, I know at Hauser, teachers will put together specific content or links on their teacher page for supports for the parents. And I would only say too that I think moving forward with this, I think there's still work to do, and there's definitely, like especially at Hauser, alignment with the high school and everything else, especially in math, that we need to put at the very top priority. I think there's someone in the audience.
I just wanted to make one comment that I do know my fifth grader has his spiral notebooks as his SRB. So his teacher has gone through, and every time they do a lesson, it's written in a spiral notebook, which I didn't know about until the other day when he showed it to me, and every model is in there. So he brings that home every day. So when he has an issue with his homework, he looks in his own created SRB, basically. And I do know that, and I think my third grader, they're doing it the same way. So if your student brings their spiral home, that's kind of a collective, like this is, there's like 4 different ways to divide. So this is this way of division, this way of division. So I would check if your student has a spiral like that, because I know a lot of the classes are doing that, which, doesn't answer this question, but it's it's helped me answer, helpful in a way.
And I would just piggyback on that, because today, my first grader got 2 sheets home from the My Math workbook. They tear them out. And then the teacher photocopied the assignment that I could sit there and look and say, okay, this is what we're learning. And then he then basically did that same sheet. Of course, every teacher is going to do things differently.
Right.
I think that's what you're speaking to.
Yep.
Is how do we find some sort of consensus so that what you get, Rachel, at home and what I get at home maybe is different.
Brian, who creates the spiral notebook that Linda was speaking of?
The kids do, and actually there's a ton of there's a lot of research on there that's our kids learn best, and then teachers look through it, teachers check it to make sure that it's correct. We haven't reached the PD level at every grade level. We've been going by grade level and how students to create that type of resource. There's a lot of learning that needs to be involved at both the teacher level as well as the student level on how to create an effective resource, which is one of the areas that we're focusing on Mondays. But we have several grade levels that have already often been going with it, and it's proven to be a good resource. Again, we definitely did not want to go in last year and say we want to spend all this money on this math resource. We wanted to make sure that we had time to investigate a resource if we choose one. We wanted to make sure that we had time to pilot and make it, a fiscally responsible decision as well. And we're still in the process of looking at them, and we're still in the process of trying to find, which one if there is one, that would be best for our district.
Have we spent any money on My Math?
Journals? Yeah.
The books.
Yeah.
Because what I've seen is, I haven't seen one sheet of everyday math come home, and it's just from a third grade perspective. Not saying I don't like it, but it seems to me that we adopted everyday math, but now the shift, and if I've heard everyone correctly, seems to be more towards the My Math textbook. Is that just because it's more Common Core aligned?
Yes,
Or is it your intention that everyday math is going to be phased out and My Math is going to be fully adopted next year? Have we spent a lot of money on My Math?
Yeah, no, the money we spent on My Math is pretty similar to what we would spend on the student journals for everyday math. It's a resource. You know, it's not intended to be the curriculum, but it filled our needs to be Common Core aligned at an accelerated pace. The best. I mean, our teachers spend a lot of time looking at what we need now, and this was a resource. In order for us to get this going and get moving, this is the resource. To be honest and say, one of the resources that I'm looking at, and I shouldn't say this too loud, is Everyday Math has an Everyday Math 4 coming out next year. Okay, what Everyday Math did is they took out everything that wasn't. School districts were moving away from Everyday Math because they were saying that it was aligned, and it was partially, but they also had a lot of other stuff in the curriculum. So I talked to the rep the other day, and they took all that stuff out for Everyday Math 4. So it was supposed to be fully aligned. So I can't say that we're philosophically shifting. I'm saying for what we needed for our kids to start closing those gaps moving forward, this was a better resource for them.
Okay, so then my other question is, if I walk into a third grade classroom at Central and they're covering, estimation, and they're using the My Math, or am I going to see the same thing over at Ames and over at Blythe? It's not that they're following it. I understand teaching methods are different,
Yeah.
but will it be the same, or is someone just going rogue and using everyday math?
No. That's one of the important things solution is we've identified these resources as the best resource to meet that standard. So what's in the sync solution for that third grade that day is what our teachers are using.
Or should be using?
Yes.
And so how do we know if they're all using it? Is that
No,
the
and
principal's
I
job?
worry about that. I really do. I think that's where we count on our principals to be getting it out of the classrooms and ensuring, as well as teammates, because there's a lot of collaboration going on this year. So
Because it's my concern that we
No, it's a great
invest in this money and some teachers don't use it. But I just think if it's more, if everyone's using My Math, then when you collaborate together and say, well, this didn't work and this didn't work, and then it's a constant state of adjustment. And if a teacher isn't using or isn't with the program, then I think we have a problem.
Yeah. No, and I think the teachers would say that I've been a big stickler on that.
Okay.
And this is because again, as we make instructional decisions in the future, we need to have a platform, a consistent platform that say this is what works and this is what
Didn't work.
we need. Yeah.
Okay. RTI was next on the list. I imagine there are questions on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Maybe I'll pose a question and then give you guys a chance to add up the totals. But Steve, the total number of RTI students at Hauser, do you know what those are? And then I'd like to know what they are at the elementaries as well.
Okay.
We have them right here in your packet. They're in your packet. So in the extras, we broke it down by school.
So how about the totals then
For Ames, we have 20 students in math RTI support and 64 in reading, and that's school-wide, K through 5. In Blythe, math is 12 and reading is 23. In Central, math is 20 and reading is 56. And in Hollywood, math is 7 and reading is 24. And then at Hauser, they're broken apart by grade level. 6th grade, math is 20, reading is 14. 7th grade, math is 21, reading is 18. And for 8th grade, math is 19, reading is 14, for a total of 60 students in RTI math at Hauser and 46 for RTI reading at Hauser.
Okay, 46, 60. So it looks like total, about 22 to 25% of our students are now eligible to receive the RTI. Is this pyramid chart that you show here, do these reflect the students that are presently identified as RTI?
Those are based on last year's ISAT scores. So that is one measure. Typically, though, ISAT was a pretty consistent measure for RTI purposes, but we look at more than one piece of data. But that is just on that one test how our kids follow. That is also the test that is, how our district is identified, published in that as well. So it's important to look at.
So do you think the difference here between pre and post Common Core aligned cut scores, but that's just strictly a testing issue? How we test students, or is it more than that? Does it have to do with how we're teaching the students and how they're learning? And is this maybe a better way to judge student growth than this was?
So I think, and that's a great question. I think that is reflective of two things, not just students' performance on that assessment, but with the change in rigor and the change in question types and the change in, in ELA, the shifts, comes a different type of teaching and learning. And it's that instructional piece as well that we're working on Mondays that to really better align with some of the instructional shifts in the Common Core. So, the curriculum itself isn't going to change that by itself. It's critical. It's that instruction piece.
Ultimately, though, I would say we need to focus on the post-cut scores because that reflects the new expectations, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
And our curriculum last year wasn't aligned with Common
Right.
Core. So, of
And
course,
that's
we were
what
going
we
to
are-
see bigger gaps.
The results are the results. We just need to focus on this. I mean, what happened before that isn't necessarily, like, again, the comparison to year is getting out of whack. I think the thing that we need to baseline off of, at least for now, is this post-cut score.
But I think what's important on that too, though, is it does stress how important it is for us to focus on our RTI program. Because in the past, it might not have been at the top of, because our students were performing higher.
Right.
It might not have been at the top of our lists. And those math specialists have been extremely helpful in order to do that.
So I understand how RTI is implemented in the elementary schools. We have, 5 ELA interventionists and 3 math? Is that correct?
Yeah, across the district, yes.
Okay, so that's 8, and they're assigned. Now, at Hauser, RTI is handled differently, right? Could you better explain to me how those 60 students in math and 43 in reading are being helped by, you say, pulling them out? And how often are they pulled out? And who's doing the teaching?
Sure. Well, for a student who would be in a Tier 2 intervention for math, let's say, again, identified through either math scores or ISAT scores. And again, the numbers of students in our RTI program varies pretty much on a weekly basis as we progress monitor. So a student would get pulled from an encore class, either 80 to 120 minutes per week, because those classes are either 2 to 3 times a week. Receive additional minutes through the interventionists. The interventionists I mentioned earlier for math were Mrs. Couches, Mr. Harbalas, Ms. Van Holzer, Ms. Dillon, and Ms. Arazi. So just for example purposes, let's say I have an 8th grade student who needs an RTI intervention. He goes to his encore courses He's been identified, he gets pulled from that on-court course. He spends 40 minutes with Mrs. Arazi. She goes through some math skills with him, uses the ALEX program to provide additional instructional minutes to help that, to help bridge that gap for that student. That same equation or that same structure is employed with ELA as well.
If the kid gets pulled out of encore class, is he then responsible for the homework that he missed?
Well, that's a good question as well. What we've really attempted to do is not place that additional stress on that student, so we've created a system where the child could potentially take that class pass-fail if they feel as if that's too much for them.
And a big change, to be real honest, the big change at Hauser is right now our trained teachers, specialists are providing RTI services for the kids. Last year it was an encore teacher that had some time in his or her schedule, that was doing RTI services, and that's not ideal. So now we have certified, trained, same teachers that are teaching classroom instruction, so they know exactly.
Right, I know at least one of those teachers is my son's regular math
Yeah.
teacher, so.
And that's a big shift.
That's a big improvement from last year. I appreciate that change. Just looking at the RTI website down at IASP, they have an RTI component on the website, and they talk about the parent being a very important component of getting that student caught up. Are we to the level yet where we're involving parents, and are parents notified when their kids? I mean, how does that all come together?
The parent piece, as we complete the data meetings that we've done over the last week and into this week currently, students who will be placed interventions will be notified via letter and follow from the classroom teacher or the specialist, so they'll know directly. And then as we move through the progress monitoring piece, which is one part of the process this year, especially at the elementary level that we're really ramping up, is the progress monitoring component. If we're not seeing the gains that we should be, the parents, when we sit down in meetings, again as a team, are being invited into those meetings to sit down and really talk about, okay, here's what we've done for the last 6 to 8 weeks. This is the progress we were hoping we were going to get. This is where we're at currently. We might need to make some shifts, do some things a little bit differently because we're still not meeting needs at the level that we should be. So that's a process that's really undertaking at this point.
I would think that those students that need RTI services perhaps need some more structure at home, or need more assistance at home from their parents.
Well, it depends on, the student need. And I think that's part of the conversation that, the teachers, administrators, or the specialists have with parents when we talk about what we need to do. And some of those interventions are additional things that can go home with the student. If it's a reading fluency piece, it's something that can go home, that they can go to a website or go to, have an iPod that we've checked out with them to utilize on the home piece to work on a skill like reading fluency.
In addition to the letters, that's what this Friday's parent-teacher conference time from 12:15 to 4:10 p.m. is, for those teachers to make that personal connection with the parent. There was an invitation sent out to the parent to say your child's been identified for RTI either Tier 2 or Tier 3. Please come on in for a conference. So that's once again where we can discuss what does that home-school partnership look like, and how teachers can then discuss with the parents how they can support the learner and their child's learning at home.
Great.
One thing I thought, Pete, you mentioned was that having the school psychologist in-house, providing some of that coordination. I will just simply say that I give a big thumbs up to that. We had our little pre-conference with 7th grade teaching team, and the Hauser psychologist was there and kind of took notes and coordinated and is doing follow-ups to coordinate with across all the team. And I mean, it's amazing. I'm really happy about that. It's a huge improvement. So.
Well, we thank you for that, because you all approved having those positions shift from LASI to be district, and we were able to buy, one more and have one at each building. So it's been great with that, with the same amount of dollars. And I think they're key in RTI. They're key in analyzing data. They're key in supporting kids. And I think that has been instrumental.
And they support them. Helping them with monitoring that student performance, progress in collecting that data, and just making sure we're keeping fidelity with the process. It's another set of hands that helps employers.
And it's consistent. So, the same person is at Central, gets to know the kids, gets to know the teachers, gets to know the families, where in the past, it was based on LADSI's schedule. So depending on when LADSI would assign them to our building, and they could pull them at any time and send somebody else. So it's nice now to have district employees be our psychologists, who are such critical roles in supporting the most neediest students and families.
I think we recognize Mrs. Shaw. She did an amazing job. Was part of the interview process with some of the psychologists we brought on board, and I think we pulled in some of the best. Really did. They're doing a great job for us.
And one of the key pieces, too, is I believe one of our psychologists is bilingual.
Yes.
So it's been nice, since some of those families do come in and needing those extra support, that our psychologist is there to intervene and support in that respect, too.
That's Mrs. Cavey in Ames. She's been very resourceful.
In general, has that shift from LADSI to in-district for across the special ed services, is that been smooth? I mean, have there been any bumps in that road, or?
Seamless.
Okay.
You know, wonderful.
And no issues with LADSI since we're rolling off some of their?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Positive. Understanding what need we have in the district, just important in our time.
Okay.
So, Bobby, for us to reach the top 50 schools in Illinois, do you see this RTI as a critical component or a less than critical component?
It's a huge component, because we're doing it now with fidelity. We're doing it now, we're able to monitor it, we're intervening where kids have needs. And what happens is as we heard, the gap gets bigger. So our kids then start to decline. If we can catch them sooner, we can intervene quicker, we can intervene more often, and we can get those students back into Tier 1 instruction in the classroom, or extend them and review and reteach what we need to review and reteach. If kids aren't making growth because they're above grade level, we need to intervene there too. So absolutely, it's going to continue the growth pattern moving forward.
As a critical component of meeting our goals and strategies, how do we turn, let's say, RTI into an action plan that's measurable? Or our efforts?
Some of our goals and priorities are looking already at RTI, like looking at our students that are falling into the Tier 2, into the Tier 3 level, that they're going to exceed their progress targets through what we're using this year is the MAP assessment, because we know we can see that growth. So we've already put that into place, and then utilizing our math interventionist, our reading specialist, our resource teacher, not only to deliver those interventions to the students, but then also in the collaboration with the classroom teachers to arm them with strategies too. So because the interventionists aren't with students all the time, they're there for those pull-out services. But what you're going to do, when you're going to see the rise in the test scores, and the rise in the overall student performance, is when those types of interventions are maximized all the time, and the classroom teachers own that knowledge of how to most effectively meet those students' needs too. So some of those targets are already in place at the building level in terms of where we're headed as building staff.
So is there some kind of goal to move 20% of the kids out of Tier 2 and into Tier 3, or is that too?
We want all of our kids to be in Tier 1.
I'm
That's
sorry,
our goal.
going the other way. Michael Bryan. In education.
I thought that's what he meant when he said it should be a diamond, that the high-achieving kids should
That's
move
what
to
I'm
the
thinking
middle
about.
and the same,
Yes.
wait a minute.
If you look at your children that are in Tier 1, you want them to either meet or exceed their progress targets. If you're looking at students that are falling into Tier 2 or Tier 3, you want them to exceed their progress targets, because you want to essentially narrow that gap. And so those are some of the measurable goals. And through the RTI process, through utilizing our school psychologists and conducting more frequent data meetings and analyzing how our interventions are working, that's how we're able to have those checkpoints along the way to see if we're meeting our goals.
All right, so I mean, is there a set number that you want to move out of the two lower bands? You want to move each one?
It's.
And how
Or is that-
fast
Yeah.
should
Yeah,
that
over
be
time.
happening?
Is there a number and how fast? Do you think a half a year is unrealistic? A full year? What are we looking at?
We'd
So-
like to see, if I could go back to our action plan, we've identified that we want to see 2 years of growth within a year for all of our students in 2 years from now.
All right, that's fair.
So once we've had 2 years of Common Core assessments and alignment with our curriculum, and had the 2 years of interventions with RTI, we want to see each student have 2 years of growth within a 1-year time span. So if I'm a 3rd grade student, but I'm performing at the 2nd grade level, I want to be able to be at the 4th grade level within the end of my 3rd grade year.
And then if I could just add too, you know, it was mentioned today that like RTI is a revolving door. But what I really think that we want to look at is not RTI, you know, as a door that kids come out of and go back into. And what I mean by that is that when we are looking at student growth and having 2 years growth per year, another thing that we need to focus on is the fact that those kids that are going from like tier 2 down to tier 1, that it's not a temporary visit to tier 1. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
like, we could take a snapshot in time and say, okay, great, you know, at this point in time, we've moved, you know, 80%. But there is some longevity in the goal too, to make sure that those kids are staying there.
All right, so you think it's wrong to do that kind of goal that we got to move X amount out of this tier? You think it's more of a better goal to have 2 years of growth?
We should look at each individual child and say, we want
Right.
every single child to move 2 years of growth.
No matter what band.
No matter
they're in.
what band, no matter if they're at tier 3, no matter if they're, you know, at the lower level, if they're in 3rd grade, performing at a 2nd grade level, you want them to have 2 years of growth. If they're at 3rd grade, performing at a 5th grade level, you want them to have 2 years of growth. You want to continue to see them grow. You don't want to plateau, and you don't want them to decline. So for example, I'm just, you know, I'm looking at the chart that is in the packet. I'm looking at Ames School, 1st grade, there was 4 students in math RTI. It would be great if those 4 all left and went back into tier 1. We want to keep them in tier 1. But that doesn't mean that 4 number might not stay, because we may have 4 new kids that unfortunately we identify in the 2nd trimester with their MAP or with their Ames Web score that need extra support. So we just want to that's why I want to look at each individual student rather than the number. I don't want to say that we want the 4 to be a 2, because that could be different at every time. I want to look at each individual child, and I think that's where these data teams are so important at each building, because they're looking at every single kid.
And the winter assessments become even that more important. That winter map that wasn't universally delivered the last few years. That's a new piece we're doing this year. That's going to allow buildings to catch kids who tested really well early on, and in the past where they said, hey, they're doing great, there's no need to monitor them, and all of a sudden we get to the spring and the map test is understood again, and all of a sudden we have all these new kids that popped up that we didn't catch them in years.
So we only were testing twice before that.
Across 2 through 5, last year we only did fall and spring. Winter was those tier 2, 3 kids. So now we're doing everybody fall, winter, spring, and that's going to allow us to catch some kids who might have slipped through the cracks.
And the spring scores have just been made available to us within the last couple of weeks, or?
Those are the fall scores.
Oh, the fall scores, okay.
Yeah, there's, you know, one thing that I'm looking into is, you know, there's been some complications with NWA math, the company that administers Mapper. In the past, you had to take a fall assessment, kids had to take the fall test in order for us to generate certain reports that we use to help drive instruction. What I'm hoping is going to happen, that may happen already, is in the future, we might just test in the spring, because there's not that much difference in achievement over the summer. You know, you test in the spring and then you test again in the fall. So if we're able to...
You learn how much they forgot.
Well, exactly, you know, but then that's catch up, you know what I mean? Like that stuff once you're back in school, they catch it quickly, hopefully. So it's not necessarily, we want to make sure we're using our class seminar assessments very wisely, and that might be something, Randy, that we need to take another look at, because we really could be moving off of our spring scores.
So, how about summer school? You know, there's 300 RTI students, you know, in our district. I assume they get invitations to summer school, right? And in the past, how many have accepted? And I mean, is there a sense of how we're doing with summer school and addressing the needs? Because those are that's an important time, of course. The math is there's a 2-week session in June and another 2-week session in what, August?
Actually, 3 weeks in June, 2 weeks in August.
So that's 5 weeks
weeks
of
of instruction.
additional instruction.
And the rate of attendance based on invitation is, more or less on availability of, families being in town. And that's, something that we have to look at is definitely the structure of what summer school looks like. This past summer, we went off of the format that we've had in the district for, since I've been here. But it's admittedly not the best format for it. So looking at the data that we have now and the resources that we have, both human and materials, what we can do to make this a better process going forward. So that is definitely something that, and we even knew going into summer school last year that we wanted to change the format. It's just, it was, the time wasn't there to allow that change. So we went with what we could and did the best we could. And, was it ideal? No. Did we do some good things? Absolutely. But that's definitely something that needs to be revised going forward.
Can we put that on the future ed committee agenda?
Oh,
Whenever
yes.
it makes sense that you guys have those conversations and just get an update? And maybe, because, I think summer school is a good topic, but I don't know how much we can talk about now. Thank you.
To try and move off RTI, when's the first park test coming? Is it spring that the kids are gonna take it?
Yes.
First week of March, I think, right?
First one will be April.
Oh, is it April?
And then
So-
It's March.
If that's the
March,
case,
April.
if
March,
that's the
April
case,
window.
do we have the infrastructure now to administer it?
It's just
Just yes or no?
Sorry, I gotta look at time for that one. I'm worried about that.
I mean, overall, no.
Okay.
I mean, we have different situations at different buildings given our connectivity.
All right, so then if that's the case, with your presentation and goals, I get it, that's ultimately want to be, but like, the emails weren't even working, a couple weeks ago, and I know it's been fixed, and you've been trying hard. Where are we on the last meeting I know we're trying to get was to try and get bids to build our fiber and infrastructure, and I expected that to be at this meeting or the finance meeting, and it just doesn't seem like we have those bids yet, or can you update on that?
In order to remain compliant with the E-rate process, and we're just to get 40% discount, you did need to go through an RFP process, request for proposal. And that was initiated at the beginning of September, and those proposals, the due dates were last Friday.
Okay.
We received 6 proposals. Last night, we narrowed it down to 3.
And last night, just to remind everybody, was the Technology Steering Committee. So we had presented them the information last night.
So we narrowed it down to 3. The proposals are very close from a price standpoint. We also want to make sure we're identifying any other costs that might also be not apparent within the proposals. And then the intent is to make a recommendation at the
October 21st board meeting.
October 21st board meeting.
All right, so assuming we get the recommendation and vote on it, how soon can we?
60 to 90 days to get that to get fiber and connectivity in place.
Okay, so then once that is up, then I assume we can administer park tests and not have a problem?
You should be able to do that a lot.
Okay, all right, good. And then, trying to get teachers a better email system.
The email
I know
system,
talked
we
about-
have, that project is already underway. We have we had, Net 56 had attempted to, they started that process. We're using another vendor in order to really pick up where they left off. But essentially, we're starting from square one with that. We have a kickoff meeting on Thursday, and we're anticipating completion by mid-November.
Michael, I just want to make sure that you're not trying to hijack this
Oh.
ed committee meeting and
Yeah,
make it a
I
finance committee
absolutely
meeting,
am.
because that will
Guilty
not
as charged.
be allowed.
Absolutely, all right.
I had another question just about the park test. So you talked about the fact that you're going to look to see if you have the ability technologically to administer the test, but then that second component of are the children going to be equipped with how to take this test, or what the test is going to look like? Because I remember when there was the first map test, There was a lot of, the kid didn't know how to deal with the
Right.
technology, so it wasn't a reflection of an accurate reflection of the test skills.
Right, and actually, one of the, when I referenced a 21st century skills assessment, one of the vendors that I'm working with, they also have a park readiness assessment. So that's something that will give us a really good idea, a really good sense of where students are relative to that. And if there are some gaps, we'll have some time to address that.
Well,
So.
if I could just add too, the MAP Common Core Line test has incorporated a lot of those skills that students are going to need for the park test. That's an evolving test, so some new skills are added. So our students have been, since last year to this year, they've been exposed to that type of testing. So they have some practice with it. But again, the hard part is without having park in front of us, to know exactly what it's going to look like once it's actually released.
The field test also, last year I was part of the park field test, requires that there's a 30-minute tutorial prior to any student actually taking the assessment. So the students sit down, they understand how to manipulate the screens, manipulate the tools that are involved in the testing before ever taking an assessment.
Can students, say they finish the test, can they go back and review from the start? Or are they submitted, once you're done, you're done?
Well, yes and no. Prior to submitting your assessment, you have the ability to go back and review all of them. The test actually prompts you to do so. But once you've completed the test, you basically, with a point and click, you sign out and you're done.
All right, so that's good. And it does allow you to go back.
Yeah, the tools, again, that was the field test that I administered. The tools that are involved in the park test are actually very good. It helps kids to manipulate, highlight, flip pages. I mean, they're pretty good. And they prompt kids to go back and check your work. Have you checked, if there's a question that you have, like you've come across number 17 and couldn't answer it, well, you put it on hold and you go back to it, so.
Quick question about MAP, really quick, because it came up in context of RTI. Do you guys look at the RTI students within the MAP scores, and when we look at the growth, will you be able to help us understand whether or not we're achieving the 2-year growth or whatever?
We'd like to actually present by school what the MAP scores are at our first quarter kind of review, so you can see where our kids started out with our first assessment. With Common Core Line curriculum, then do it again in the winter, and then do it again in the spring, so you can see that growth.
I'm just asking about RTI because I don't remember in past presentations that being called out.
So I can add to that too. Each student, when they take the MAP assessment, is given an individual growth target. That growth target is based on their performance on the test. If a student scores lower, their growth target is higher, right? So let's say they are in 3rd grade. Their growth target might be 12 points for that year, okay? That includes catch-up growth. So if you are if you're in 4th grade and you score really high, your growth points might be 3 points, right? But at that level, those 3 points can be the difference between grade levels. So that is something, individual student growth targets that you can monitor. The issue that I've had in the past, and we would have to set a different goal from this, is that it was something like 50% or 60% of your students could be expected to make their growth target, and that's a good year. And that's from NWA. We would obviously want to accelerate that. So there's some more digging.
Well, let me rephrase the question. Can you help us when we get the MAP results, understand how this is going to help us figure out where we're at with what we're doing with RTI. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's my question.
Fall to the winter?
Whenever you have the data and you're ready to make some sense of it, help us understand as well, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, how are you going to measure the effectiveness of your RTI efforts and I guess that's the question, and can you write that down and put it in an action plan or a target?
Sure.
And then who sets the individual target for every student on MAP scores, the growth targets?
NWA does, the company. They have a norming group of millions of students, so they use that norming group to set the targets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all right, so it's some kind of an algorithm or whatever.
Yeah, and it's very research-based. I mean, I think it's solid in its research.
And what does NWA stand for?
Northwest Alliance, I think.
Is it down, I think there's a key down.
Northwest Educational Association.
Okay.
Oh, NWEA.
Yeah.
How is that growth target communicated to the child? Are they involved in that?
Yes.
And how does that
You know,
happen? Or and the child and the family?
I think they're reported on the map results
It's
that
on the-
you
it
report you see
goes on
as a
maybe-
parent. Yeah, it's shown
Is it
for
on
each
the
subject
conferences
area.
as well?
Sorry?
Parent-teacher conferences as well.
Yeah, they cover that.
You can tell your child's growth chart?
Yes, at the conference, they go over that report with the teacher, and they'll explain each subject area, what the growth was and what they're working on.
It could be.
It's very specific to the child, is the thing. So how you translate that individually specialized to the child thing to an overall, way to evaluate the program, RTI, et cetera, you guys figure that out and then share that with us.
Fair enough. But we might want to look at the consistency of that as well. That
Yeah.
sounds like we should.
Okay. That was RTI. Any instructional technology goals? I had one question. Did the 21 T-cubed team meet?
Yes, we
I
did.
remember there was something on the schedule I would have liked to attend, but I didn't make it. How many meetings have there been, and what?
That was our first one.
Okay.
We're gonna schedule meetings once a month. Some of the outcomes of that meeting, we have not yet discussed as a leadership team. We'll be discussing that tomorrow. And
So what kinds of things are discussed? Instructional technology topics, or
well, the
operational, both?
It was primarily, it's really instructional that's discussed there. And the topics of conversation were based around how can we help support the implementation of Common Core. And so there were some suggestions made about how the committee had met in the past in terms of the timing of when they occurred. And that would potentially shape how we address some of the identified potential needs moving forward. But the focus of, with input from Dr. Gannon, he was able to attend, was that how we would best be able to support the implementation of Common Core was by really identifying resources, web-based resources and other 21st century tools that could support the curriculum that teach, kind of doing a lot of vetting and making recommendations on resources, because a lot of with the efforts and time that is being spent by staff on the implementation, they don't necessarily have that time to be evaluating different types of resources, and then also having it come from more of a district level committee also lends itself to a certain amount of consistency in use of resources across the district. So if it was deemed to be a good resource for elementary mathematics or English language arts, that would be something that we could potentially implement across the district, as opposed to teachers having to kind of vet their own resources.
Okay.
And I don't mean names of people, but what's the composition of the T3 team?
That committee has traditionally been a combination of administrators, teachers, and parents. The level of participation has, I think, has gradually dropped. We had about, I think there were 6 or 7 people that attended, including 2 parents, and myself, Dr. Gannon, and a couple of instructional tech people. So there was 3 or 4 staff that were able to attend. Again, I think with implementation of Common Core and staff schedule, I think participation is just time is something that is more difficult to put forth, and so that's why some of the things that we brainstormed were other meeting times. When could we possibly meet as a committee?
Brian, was that the same composition as last year of the T3 team? Parents?
Yes,
Yeah, the composition hasn't changed. You know, and I will say that, you know, because of the parent component, like where Steve and I are going to visit, you know, Leiden High School, because we have a parent that is a tech teacher at Leiden High School that's doing a bunch of cool stuff with technology. So in that sense, I really like the makeup because it allows us to work with our community and expand our, you know, our knowledge of what we're doing as well. But this was probably the last amount of people at this meeting than we have in the past.
That's
And-
not Lions High School out in Las Vegas.
Leiden.
Oh, Leiden,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Where's that at?
Elmwood,
Oh.
Franklin.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
there's two of them, so I don't remember.
Franklin Park and
Yeah.
Elmwood Park.
Yeah, but he was sharing some stuff. That
It
was a joke.
Yeah, Leiden's they implemented a Chrome 101 program a number of years ago, and they have annual symposiums in my former district. We sent about 10 of our tech staff there to
Okay.
symposiums as we were looking to implement
Okay.
Chrome.
And sorry, one real quick, the steering committee you mentioned when Michael was trying to hijack my meeting, that's the one with the community members and parents?
Correct.
Okay.
It's largely community members, and and that is the meeting where I think one or two board members have expressed interest in attending, and typically we have that one present. But
How many times have they met?
I think about 3.
yeah, actually, I think that was our fourth.
Over the entire, but just
But
since school started?
June, July.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
And since school started just once.
Yeah,
That was our
okay.
first one.
Got it.
I was going to ask about cyber crime, and cyber security and so forth. You know, it's changing from week to week. We hear it in the news every day. If somebody wants to hurt a child, you know, they go through the computer to do it. I'm just wondering how are we staying on the cutting edge of that, or you know, providing secure laptops and so forth.
I think what we should also do is add that to a future policy committee agenda. And I think once we set policy on how we want to see not only just cyberbullying, but just appropriateness use of technology, I think we need to establish that. But just, we got information from Chief Weitzel, and it's going to go out tomorrow in the e-backpack, that there's a parent information night, a community kind of forum at Morton High School next Wednesday. So we'll be sending that out. And I actually met with a parent during open office hours who expressed interest in the same thing and has shared some resources. So I think we'll share resources on how to educate our community and educate our kids. But I think as a district, we definitely need to have more direct and distinct policies in place for it.
Do we have, I would guess we would have some files of some sensitive information, social security numbers of some parents or something. Is that, do we have any of that, and is it secure?
Well, I think one of the big plus sides of our critical systems are that they're not premise-based. So our student information system is hosted. So essentially Pearson is securing that. Our financial system, where we wouldn't have any social security numbers on our community members, on Beyond for staff, and that's hosted through the township. The township has the finance package. Our mail system will be hosted. That's another critical system. And I think the most critical system that we'll have left on site will be our phone system. But from an information standpoint, it really goes back to a lot of, whether it's cyber predator type concerns or security concerns, it boils down to education, educating staff, educating students. I mean, the information can be present in one place, but if a staff member has the ability to download it and isn't keeping that information secure, then that's going to be a vulnerability. And our weakest link is probably always going to be staff education and making sure that staff are aware of what are good information security practices and how they should make sure that any information, that personally identifiable information, is kept secure.
Okay, then the final discussion topic under the academic and professional excellence was special ed. Are there any questions right now on that?
Well, I have one. I believe the presentation said that we are addressing over-identification of IEPs. How is this different than the work that went on last year? We thought at least some of that had already been done, so.
I think so, but at the same time, I think we need to help staff understand it's something that you need to revisit. We need to look at student progress. Are students still truly delayed? We need to look at when we're identifying them as well too. With RTI, with that RTI process in place, often that will help us not need to identify a child to give them help. In the old days, that's kind of how it was done. That's how students received extra help if they were struggling a little. But now with the RTI process in place, we can help support students and not necessarily need to identify them. Again, though, if interventions are very intensive and every time you pull back a little bit, if you need to return to it, then we do need to look to evaluate. We can use that responsive intervention data, and the psychologists help the teams with that, use that data to help to make decisions if a child needs more intense instruction all the time. But hopefully with the RTI process, that will help us from looking at over-identifying students. And looking at, too, when students do make their goals and they are progressing, we need to look at eligibility again to see if they still are eligible and dismiss as appropriate.
Is that, actually, it sounds like, first of all, are you benchmarking your changes in in the number of students with IEPs?
Well, that data is always formulated at your percentages, and we'll be looking at that, yes.
And I guess this is another way of assessing the efficacy of the RTI program too, if it seems to be impacting.
And that's why the psychologists who are our experts on data are going to be more connected. That's why we talk about kind of melding the RTI process and that student services team process together. And that's happening a little bit at the buildings already, but we're wanting to make a standard process that's uniform across the district, so each building is following that same agenda and process of student services team and RTI working together, because that data is critical to use to make decisions. And we have to make sure that that data that's being used is data and interventions that have been implemented with integrity and fidelity.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Let me ask about, we had a discussion this last summer about paraprofessionals and whether they be full-time or continue to be part-time employees and so forth. I know this is not the place for that, but I would think that we should gain some understanding on this issue, well before next June, when the paraprofessional contract is over and we're faced with the decision whether to, RIF them and so forth. I would just like to kind of plant the seed for us to have a good discussion on that.
I do have a question though, that you brought up the paraprofessional. How do you know you have the right number?
Well, what you really need to do is, and something that we'll start looking at earlier than later, probably around January, is we need to look at student need and the amount of support this child needs to be successful. And working with the special education and teams at each building to look at that. We need to be careful we need to provide support to students so that they can be successful, but we also need to make sure that we're fostering their independence as well. So it's a team decision to look at the amount of support that a child needs. And on that team, of course, is a parent as well too. But we really need to look at that independence factor and to really truly think about the amount of support a child needs. If a child is working with a related service provider, let's say the certain time or a special education teacher, that paraprofessional does not need to be present necessarily with that child and can be used in other ways in the building, but you need to be flexible and creative with the use of paraprofessionals.
And you're going to be assessing that again, or?
We start looking at the needs of students, and some of that is difficult to determine. We can start looking at it in January, but some of that's difficult to determine until we've gone through the year with IEP meetings to look at the level of support that students need that's determined at those IEP meetings.
Does any of our testing, our map testing, or assist in any of that, or is that just the?
No, that's
has
very
nothing to do with it?
different. Right.
Okay.
Are paraprofessionals involved in professional development?
They are.
Just-
Most definitely. Right now, on our 1 hour Mondays with the paraprofessionals are joining their grade levels that they are working in the most on the Common Core curriculum. And then the last Mondays of the month, when we have that 2 hour block, they're all coming together to work on different instruction strategies. In September was our first 2 hour one, and we worked on the role of paraprofessional in inclusive setting, and we'll be doing more 2 hour workshops, Institute Day as well. We will be having, we spent 3 hours with the paraprofessionals.
Right.
How many different breakdowns of groups are there meeting on Mondays on the early release? It's not all one big class.
Depends on the week.
No,
We can send that to you.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like,
Yeah, it depends on the
Is
session.
it in here?
Typically, we're designing for, I would say,
but they're not broken down.
Okay.
And for example, like the related service providers are all looking at some of the most common skills that they need to address in students, most common as a student needs, and looking at, because IEP goals need to be written to the Common Core standards as well too. So they're looking at skills that they're working on and most often work on, and looking to see what Common Core standards does that skill fall under to help them as they're applying for students.
Are we gonna get this professional excellence plan going forward?
Every
For
trimester.
Every trimester.
Mhm.
So this has some of the information. Maybe if we just break it down further into which different groups are meeting.
Well, that, yeah, and now, we did get something sent to us a week or so ago, an email.
Well, every week in the update, I put what the schedule is for Monday in your weekly update, and it divides it up by group. So where are the classroom teachers, where are the grade level teachers, where are the related services, where are specific subject matter teachers, where are technology people? So it breaks it down and shares with you what everybody's
We
doing.
got something, I'll have to look for it, maybe it was that,
Can we put this on the board book or on the website?
It
So
is.
everybody can get it?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the website, and it's in board book.
Awesome. Okay, special ed, going, gone. All right. Let's see, there's 2 more topics for tonight. Request was made to get some substitute information. I think that information was included in the extras tab under the meeting and board book tonight. So I guess I don't think you didn't prepare any
Nope,
specific topics,
it was just more
but,
as a follow-up. I think board members had requested it, so it's
yeah,
there.
if you guys were able to look at the details, and if you have any questions, we can certainly discuss that now.
We have substitute usage for 2013, 2014. Are there current usage numbers available?
For this month?
Yeah, to date.
Yes, for this month, and we compared it, we had about, sorry, hold on. We have 195 subs for the month of September thus far. And we look back in 2011, there was 192. In 2012, there was 176, and in 2013, there was 208. And just to keep in mind, no committee work was started when we took this
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah, but for those comparisons to be made, we'd have to know what the total number of staff was.
Right, and I have that,
so
and
those-
since that just came up, I didn't put it in the report, since somebody had just asked about that. But increasing the number of staff. So it went from like 195 to 207 to 205 to 200. So it varies, so it's not an accurate ratio right now. But we can get that for you,
All
for
right.
the, like, month by month if you want to look at it.
If we can get it broken down as it is in the 2013-14 graph, that would be really useful too, is the reason codes.
You want it
for
by
their
month?
absence. Yeah, just on an ongoing basis, something that just keeps us updated what we're doing with our substitute usage.
Sure. We'll include that with our enrollment report.
That sounds good.
Okay.
And then, the other thing is, since we have a goal to, get back into the top 50, how do we manage our substitutes so that, substitutes, have a positive impact on that number, or on our ability to get into the top 50? I think the conventional wisdom might be if you have too many substitutes, you're gonna suffer an instruction, right? So how do we keep that from occurring, especially since we don't have control over sicknesses per se?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've taken a really close look at, and we need to continue is, sickness and personal days and stuff are things that happen out of our control. But whatever in our control, we need to really focus on. And that includes, releasing teachers.
I'm sorry, what?
That includes releasing teachers for professional development, releasing teachers for, data meetings and that type of stuff. We have to really look at how we're doing that, and we have been, and try, to every extent, not to do that as much as possible.
Again,
That's what we have control over.
is there a way to state that as an action plan to reduce the number and you know what I mean? In other words, we want to make it a goal, so how do we express that?
If you don't mind us working on putting something together for that, I think we can.
Yeah, no, I
just want to think about some of the logistics, something that's measurable that takes some extraneous variables out.
No, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to come, but we've talked about it quite a bit over the last year or so. When we do get feedback from families that it's kind of a lot. So if there's a way to manage it differently.
Other school districts are experiencing the same issues that we experienced last year, with substitutes. I would hope things are improving this year. Are they not?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. There are some things that we can do to perhaps reduce, or not. You can't reduce so much the. Well, yes, we can reduce some of the releases of our teachers, but how about on the other side, increasing the pool of highly qualified substitutes, so they want to come to Riverside District 96 as opposed to going to another school district. And I know, I think Steve, you've been working on this a little bit. I don't know if you can share with us anything.
But regarding that West Suburban Consortium
Yes.
piece where the principals met last week to discuss the price at which they were paying substitutes. So is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and how that fits into the whole package of improving the substitute situation, so we're not having to catch as catch can at 8:30 in the morning, trying to find someone to fill in a role.
Well, my understanding is that we do work with, sort of a core group. And again, I don't know what their assignments are or what they all do, but is there a way to even beef up their preparedness? Or just the fact that this core group helps, I'm sure that helps quite a bit.
We've had some, in my previous districts, had some substitute training. So if there was a group of like 10 or 12, and we provide this on a quarterly or, trimester basis, or even semester, just depending on the size of how often we need them. But then, they would go over like the technology. We're a heavily based technology district. How do we use how do we use the computers? How do we use the interactive whiteboards? How do we record attendance in PowerSchool? What are the Common Core standards? What are we expecting in going over? And I know our schools are doing PBIS. What are the components of, or not PBIS, but starting to do the components of positive behavior and intervention? What are the components of that? So we can start looking at maybe creating a training module for substitutes, and for the regular ones, and then, every semester, as we get new people into our pool, train them as well.
I mean, it seems that it's got to have an impact on test score, academic achievement. It has to.
Sure.
It is an interruption for instruction, but if we as a district, I think what Brian says is if we can definitely monitor that. I know we're not pulling teachers out for committee work. We're limiting the use of how we're using them for data. It's really, sick and personal time that we can't really control. In your packet also are the rates of some districts that are nearby that responded to questions of how much do you pay your sub, and they've been ranked. So, we're, in the bottom third, as far as districts. If you look at the districts, the highest rate is 125 and the lowest rate is 90. We're at 100, and it, varies from 110 to 108 to 100. So, there's lots of things we can be doing, and if this is what the board, wants to include in our action plan, we would just like to know, where you see this fitting in, and, if there's training modules, if we want to look at, increasing costs, or increasing daily rates of pay, and we can look at putting together a plan for that.
Yeah, I think we would, be looking to you to tell us if it matters. I mean, would we?
Where do we stand?
Yeah, would we appreciably, improve the pool, or get a bigger pool of qualified people if we paid $10 more? I mean, do we know that? Or what would do, if we were to train people, what would we train them in? Maybe is it a way of, I don't know how they're assigned. Maybe it's a matter of using your pool and assigning them differently too. I don't know. I mean,
I think if we offer training to, if we offer training to teachers that are looking for a job, like that, they're subs, but they're hoping to get in the teaching field, I think that's a really nice opportunity for them to stay abreast with, some of the changes in education, and be a part of that too. I think that there are other, I think veteran subs would benefit from it as well and enjoy it, The hard part is it's almost like catch-22 in one sense where, so I think the biggest impact on keeping your substitutes is giving them opportunities to work. And we don't want to necessarily, that's not our goal, you know what I mean?
I see what you mean.
The less work they get from a school district, they tend to go over to another school district because they're getting more work, and you lose people in that pool as well. So there are several different factors to look at as far as what's the best way to do it.
Yeah, so you want to give them opportunities to work so they stay with you, but
But you don't
that's
wanna-
but
right.
that's counterintuitive to what you're trying to accomplish, which is.
Brian, I have a question about maybe a couple of questions on the substitutes and the numbers. And my understanding was the whole idea of professional development was so that you'd have all your teachers there and you wouldn't be pulling your teachers out of the classes to do the professional development and putting subs in there. So, number one is, are they being pulled for that purpose? Because I heard you say that, well, we should look at not pulling them for various things. And then I heard Bhavna saying, well, we don't. Well, are they being pulled for professional development or not?
No,
Okay.
no, I always just be cautious in case there was an extenuating circumstance, but no.
If they are not, should we not have seen a drop in the use of the subs based on the fact that I know, my understanding is last year for committee work, there was a substantial use of subs for people being pulled from the classrooms. Shouldn't we have seen a corresponding drop in the use of subs?
Well, we only have 1 month of data so far.
And we have not seen it. So if we looked at the past 4 years, for September, it's relatively the same.
Right, but the committee work hadn't started until October of last year.
So, can I ask
There
a
you
question?
go. Yes, that's a
Where
great
does the
question.
committee work fall under the substitute usage? Which category does it fall under?
Professional development,
professional-
curricular
yeah,
development.
professional
It's like the
development.
middle column.
All right, so what's the floating subcategory stand for?
Floating subs are usually utilized for collaboration meetings, or the SST special service meetings with
IP class IP subs. It could be for the F&P testing, when the classroom teacher has to pull out to assess all the kids. That has to be done, obviously, while students are there.
There's a separate
available to them.
category for F&P testing. I don't know if you guys have this in front of you. So there's a lot of, it's about 15 different categories here. And there's one, they have one for F&P testing. We have the SIC, the personal days, the professional development curriculum. It goes on and on. But there's one
And
for
there's a
floating
special,
sub.
there's a special ed meeting as well.
Right,
I don't know if
special
that's
ed meeting.
IEP or if that's something else.
Right, so,
I think some of the floating subs, if, don't have in front of you, but what I think that is from a Hauser. Whenever possible, we try to have the classroom, if the classroom teachers are willing to sub, we'll have a system in which will cover the classes internal.
okay, so they're not paid any addition for that?
They will be paid because it's extra teaching time, but we're not hiring a sub. But we're getting the classroom teachers to do the class,
So they're being paid what, the curriculum rate per hour to be the floating sub?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so, but still, I'd be interested in a breakdown of what that incorporates, what type of, what situations are they being pulled
Well,
up?
it also says in column 2 for the floating sub-hours, it says vacancy. So does that mean that,
Where's that?
that's over on the left-hand side, and there's one of those rows for every school, and the only hours, oh, I'm sorry, there's more than one, there's a special ed meeting, sorry.
Right.
I'm looking at
But,
the.
but floating sub only turns up in that one vacancy row.
We'll follow up with what defines a floating sub.
Okay.
How is it coded?
I see.
Well, and sometimes we can't fill the position.
They tend to be big numbers. In Hauser, floating sub, 174.5, I guess.
Well, it's a substantial amount of the grand total of sub-days.
Right.
And the interesting, thing about it is I'm sitting here crunching numbers, and I'd like to echo what Juliet said, is that we added this early release for the purpose of minimizing pulling teachers out of the classroom. And pulling teachers out of the classroom is not the real pain to the bottom line. Well, that's of interest and it's a concern. Maybe we were just better off keeping it as is because it doesn't address our substitute usage cost.
Well, like what Brian was saying though is that the professional development, or not, the committee work last year started in October, right? And right now, these are numbers.
Well, I looked at overall, and I'm sitting here and I'm going by each column of each category and seeing where's the pain coming from. And Bob is correct, and most of the pain is coming from people taking sick and personal leave. That the committee work was actually a very small piece of what's costing us.
I see.
Yeah, and I kind of recalled, I think our committee work costs were about 63,000 out of a total of what, 250? I mean, but I was,
Yeah,
I thought it was a relatively, at least the dollar costs were relatively small for committee work, so it means we're using subs for other reasons.
Yeah, and I think part of, at least in my mind, part of the reason, for the professional level not pulling teachers out is not just because of subs, it's because we want our teachers in the classroom.
Right.
We don't want them pulled out of the classroom.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
it's
a big reason for it.
the cost is, it's not the main purpose. You want teachers, you want them in the classroom.
Yeah.
But if they're not in for the classroom for other reasons, you got to look at those. What are those
Oh,
other
absolutely.
reasons?
No, I agree.
Well, and I think now that going forward, and I think Mary Rose, you said, is this a need? I think if we're going to start monitoring this monthly, we can determine if it's going to be a need. Then we can align it up to, okay, how many times in a month is a specific teacher gone? Then looking at their classroom data, are those kids growing?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we can tie those two pieces together, if this is an area that we want to look at, then we'll start doing it on a monthly basis. But right now, I can't make that assessment. We can definitely do things like training, and increasing our sub pool, and have discussions about increasing daily rates of pay. But your specific question about does it impact learning? We don't know yet. I'd like to tie those together.
But you're right, we have this, and then we know how often.
Right.
We
Specific
can kind of say that it improves learning, but it's be hard to quantify, I would think. But I do know from a public standpoint, that's what I hear from parents probably the most. You know, I hear complaints about, you know, the number of substitutes and how the kids, you know, don't like to lose their teacher for a day or two, you know. So, I mean, it's something that's kind of a grassroots public relations issue that I think we need to be very aware of.
And I mean, I think that issue ties in with our goals for being in the top 50 in the state, because the bottom line is when you have the subs in the classrooms, what we see as parents and what we hear from the community is that the kids aren't getting that instructional time. They're being babysat. And the problem that you have is the only way we're going to get into the top 50% is educate our teachers and give them professional development, but increasing and having as much educational the children learning time, and to reduce the number of subs so that you can have subs as only an absolute would be a way to maximize the teaching time for those children. And then if you have to have the subs, I think the idea is that you want to increase the quality of your subs so that they're not just being babysat. And if there's subs there, are they getting, are they doing the work with the children, or are they just doing, what was it, every day the time for kids was the thing that we would see a lot, right? Because that's what we saw last year during committee time. So we're not going to get into the top 50 schools if our kids aren't getting the education time.
Right.
I just did a quick calculation. The 3 columns that cover professional development are about 13% of the total. I think that's I think that is significant. That's a non-trivial percent. So we hopefully
13% of the classroom days?
No, 13% of the grand total sub days are spent on professional development.
Which, if you figure out the daily rate, that's only $31,000. That's different than the figure we got last year.
Okay.
Of what we were spending for committee work. But there's also some other things that, you know, I understand that with sick leave and things you say you can't control. There are absence management you can undertake to address those issues. You don't get absolute right to use your sick leave. I mean, many people abuse it, and I'm just looking at these numbers. I think that there are probably people who are abusing it. That said, also, I've noticed that there's things we can control. For instance, I got several notes home that they're going to have, when parent-teacher conferences, they're doing it during the school day. So assuming that this is what every teacher in every school is doing, and I don't see a category for that. I'm not sure where that's falling into our numbers. That's something we can control. And should we?
Did you get a note that said parent-teacher conferences are during the school day?
Yes. For the October, there's kind of a midterm. Yes.
This Friday,
There's no school Friday.
It's no school Friday.
Oh, there's no school Friday. I'm sorry. My bad. I take it back.
Sure.
But the point being that the things that we can control, we should control and figure out how do we control them.
I agree.
And this is helpful for us going into negotiations.
Okay, subs. All right. We have one last issue on the agenda. That was field trips. I don't think we had any actual supporting materials, but some questions did come up from board members. So I'll open the floor to comments on field trips, just so we can see what we need to do there.
I guess I mentioned it to you about the field trips. I would like to learn how, or understand how field trips are planned, how they're implemented, who pays for them. Are all children provided similar?
Right. Is there some kind of equivalency across the district, different
Right.
grade levels, different schools?
Correct.
Yeah.
I know that the PTAs have been very active in funding and hosting field trips. Is that the extent of our field trips, PTA funded field trips, or do we have others? And if we have a very active PTA in one school and we don't in another, does that mean the students in one school benefits and those from another don't? So, I mean, those are the.
And we're starting to pull all that data, but right now, because teachers are in the beginning stages of planning for the year, we have one district paid field trip where the district pays for the transportation, and then one PTA sponsored field trip at each school by grade level. So we're trying to equalize that a little bit more, and then the exception is at Hauser, where those are all self-funded for the 3 trips that they go on, which is Laredo Traff, Springfield, and Bradford Woods. Okay.
So you're saying this year we're going to have one district funded and one PTA funded, and that will be in each school?
Yes, by grade level.
Across the board?
Yes.
And is that a departure from years past?
I think things were done a little bit differently in the years past. I don't have that information in front of me, but I know that different schools and different grade levels went on different amounts of field trips.
Yeah.
And it may not have been equivalent.
And that's what I'm really speaking to, what's happened in the past.
Yeah, we're you know what, we're hoping that in the next couple of months, we'll have everything finalized of what each grade level is doing and who's paying for what and how it's implemented, so we'll put that together for you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, trying to get this wrapped up before 10. The last thing was future meeting dates, which Mary Rose covered before, but I'll just recap. We've got October 21st, Policy Committee meeting at 6, and then regular business meeting 7:30. Finance Committee on November 4th at 7, and then November general meetings, policy and regular business on November 18th. Next Ed Committee is December 2nd, and then a December policy and regular business meeting on December 16th. Any other questions, new business, or
When
call
was the
for
next Ed Committee meeting?
December 2nd.
December 2nd.
And just so everybody knows, we are waiting right now. I've talked to Mary Rose and Michael about this, but David Sellers would like to invite Karen Valdez. She is the legislative advocate for FedEd, and she is working on Senate Bill 16 and how that funding is going to impact school districts. We've given her some dates for us to meet. She's not available at our November board meetings, so we've tentatively reserved her for December 2nd, and if that is the case, then we're going to switch education committee meeting to January, and then just, if it works out, but we haven't gotten confirmation back. And so you'll be in January.
Because your meetings are too long-winded.
No, I like the education committee meeting. It's the heart of
What we do.
what we're doing here.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for running a good meeting. And I'd just like to say the presentations tonight are
Media.
very helpful.
All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second.
Thank you, everyone.